Welcome to Book Lounge by Libby. My name is Joe, and I'm so happy you're here. Before we dive in, make sure you're following us on your favorite podcast platform and the Libby app YouTube channel so you never miss an episode. Yes, we've got audio and video for you. You can watch the show on Spotify or, like I mentioned, that Libby app YouTube channel, linked in the show notes. If you like what we're doing here, leave a comment or a review. It helps more folks find the show. With that, we're in June, and last week we celebrated that June is Audiobook Month. This week we're celebrating that June is Pride Month. Happy Pride, y'all! Pride is a time for celebration and visibility within the queer community. We celebrate Pride in June in memory of the Stonewall riots of June 28, 1969, where approximately 200 queer people stood up against the unjust treatment of the community within Greenwich Village in New York City. The US in the 50s and 60s had an anti gay legal system where queer people could be jailed or institutionalized for being themselves. There were very few establishments for the community, and the few that did exist were constantly raided by police, where patrons could be arrested and handed over to the Public Morals Squad. By the latter part of the 60s, years of abuse and the energy and empowerment from the civil rights movement, 60s counterculture, and anti Vietnam protesters brought the situation to a head at the Stonewall Inn. On that fateful day at the queer-friendly bar, it was raided by police. This time was different. Usually the bar received a tip-off so patrons could disperse and avoid the raid. With no warning, the bar was taken over by police, who were outnumbered and began booking individuals in aggressive and assaulting ways. The queer community at the Stonewall Inn and patrons at neighboring bars fought back. Queer individuals, drag queens, straight allies, and the people of Greenwich Village fought for their rights and visibility that day. A year to the day after the uprising, the first Pride marches took place in New York, Los Angeles, and San Francisco. Other large cities followed suit and organized marches as well. These marches sparked conversation and organizations grew. 2 years following the Stonewall riots, queer rights groups were founded within every major American city, as well as Australia, Canada, and Western Europe. While Stonewall was not the first instance of queer people fighting against oppression, this marked a shift within the community and society as a whole, pushing forward a wave of change. Marches became parades, and year after year, the queer community took June to celebrate victories, mourn losses, and to make sure the generations to come didn't forget those who paved the way. In 2009, 40 years after the first brick was thrown, President Obama declared June Pride Month. Take time to look at Pride and see it as a celebration, a birth, and a continuing of progress, and a way to thank those that carved out a path for the queer community. So think about where we are, where we're headed, where we've been, where we're going, and join me today with these incredible voices in queer writing. I have 4 amazing people to share with you all today, joining in 3 conversations. First up, we have a conversation with Andrew Joseph White, and then a conversation with Juno Dawson and Susie Dumond, and we'll wrap up with a conversation with Emily Austin. Andrew Joseph White grew up in Virginia and began writing before he could even write, offering scribbled paper to his parents with demands that they read the illegible nonsense back to him. After drafting several novels in middle and high school, he attended George Mason University for his bachelor's and master's in creative writing. He is the author of 3 New York Times bestselling horror novels for teens and young adults: Hell Followed With Us, a William C. Morris Debut Award finalist; The Spirit Bares Its Teeth, a 2024 Stonewall Honor; and Compound Fracture, a 2025 Prince Honor. His work focuses on the intersection of transgender and autistic identity through the lens of horror, monstrosity, violence, and rage. His upcoming novels include his adult debut, You Weren't Meant to Be Human, September 2025, and 2 more YA novels, You're No Better, 2026, and Beast Warden, 2027. Andrew has settled just outside of Washington, D.C. with his wife, their cat Poppy, and a library's worth of books. Andrew is on Instagram at AJWhiteAuthor. Juno Dawson is a #1 Sunday Times bestselling novelist, screenwriter, journalist, and a columnist for Attitude magazine. Juno's books include the global bestsellers This Book is Gay and Clean. She won the 2020 YA Book Prize for Meat Market. Her first adult fantasy trilogy, Her Majesty's Royal Coven, launched in 2022, becoming an instant bestseller. She also writes for television and has multiple shows in development both in the UK and US. Her debut short film was The Birth of Venus, BBC 2020, and she created the first official Doctor Who scripted podcast, Doctor Who Redacted, from BBC Sounds in 2022. An occasional actress and model, Juno has a cameo in the BBC's I May Destroy You 2020 and a recurring role in Holby City, BBC 2021, and was the face of Jacka Cosmetics' Playpots campaign. Juno grew up in West Yorkshire, writing imaginary episodes of Doctor Who. She later turned her talent to journalism, interviewing luminaries such as Steps and Atomic Kitten, before writing a weekly serial in a Brighton newspaper. Her writing has appeared in Glamour, The Pool, Dazed, and The Guardian. She has appeared on Pointless Celebrities, BBC's Women's Hour, Front Row, ITV News, Channel 5 News, This Morning, and Newsnight. Juno lives in Brighton. She is a part of the queer cabaret collective known as Club Silencio. In 2014, Juno became a school role model for the charity Stonewall. She's on Instagram at Juno Dawson. Susie Dumond is a queer writer originally from Little Rock, Arkansas. She is the author of Queerly Beloved and Looking for a Sign. Susie is a senior contributor at Book Riot and a bookseller at Loyalty Bookstores. She lives in Washington, D.C. with her wife Mary and her cat Maple. When she's not writing or reading, you can find her baking cupcakes or belting karaoke at the nearest gay bar. You can find her on Instagram at Susie Doom. And Emily Austin is the author of 3 novels, We Could Be Rats, Interesting Facts About Space, and Everyone in This Room Will Someday Be Dead, and one poetry collection, Gay Girl Prayers. Everyone in This Room Will Someday Be Dead was longlisted for the Stephen Leacock Memorial Medal for Humor, shortlisted for the Amazon First Novel Award, and finalist for the Ottawa Book Awards. Interesting Facts About Space has been nominated for the 2025 Forest of Reading Evergreen Award and longlisted for the Stephen Leacock Memorial Medal for Humor. It was also the #1 best-selling LGBTQIA+ book in Canada and the most circulated LGBTQIA+ book in Canadian libraries in 2024. Gay Girl Prayers was recognized as a CBC Best Book of Poetry in 2024. Emily was born in St. Thomas, Ontario, Canada. She studied English literature and religious studies at King's University College and library and information science at Western University. She has a background in libraries, teaching, and working as an information architect. She currently resides in Ottawa, the territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation. Emily is on Instagram at Emily R. Austin Author. With that, let's turn the page and dive on in. Well, Juno, Susie, thank you so much for being here to talk with me today. I am so excited to have you both here.
Thank you so much for having us, Joe.
It's going to be absolutely fantastic. 2 incredible voices in the queer lit space. And I think we should just dive right into it. I would love to hear both of your thoughts and your takes on the growth of queer literature over the years. How has the space evolved and changed?
I remember when I was a teenager, there wasn't particularly any such thing as YA fiction, never mind queer YA fiction. And you kind of sort of a lot of my youth was spent sort of like reading or sort of applying queerness to characters in things like the Powerpuff Girls or, you know, kind of whatever it was we were watching at the time. There weren't any kind of like canonically queer characters with maybe the exception of Willow on Buffy the Vampire Slayer, but, you know, that wasn't a book, that was a TV show. And it feels like TV was maybe a little minute ahead of literature anyway. And I don't think I really discovered any sort of queer characters until I read Tales of the City when I was about 19. Whereas now, you know, especially in the YA space where I started, it would be really weird to not have queer characters. You know, more often than not, there are kind of, sometimes they're peripheral, but certainly there are plenty of sort of, you know, and as well crossing over. And so if I straddle kind of young adult and fantasy, certainly in both of those arenas, there are plenty of both sapphic characters, fewer but more prominent gay male characters, I think, like in the Heartstoppers of this world and things like that. But I think, yeah, we've come a really, really long way, you know, and I think what we're seeing now kind of globally in terms of, and I'm sure we'll come on to censorship later on, I think what we're seeing is a backlash to the enormous progress that we have made the last 25 years have been a time of seismic change. Oh, I used the word seismic. It's not going to get better than that. I might as well just log out now because that's going to be the pinnacle of my podcast. So I'm done.
But you are so right. I think the same thing. Like, we could all have wondered if him counted in the Powerpuff Girls, but right, it wasn't in the book space, or like there would be one queer book and we'd all like clamor for it and read it under the covers and hope we saw ourselves in it. But even YA as a whole, not even just queer YA, it was so lacking
I think
20, 25 years ago.
Yeah, I remember a copy of Lost Souls by Poppy Zebright, who is now a trans man whose name I've completely forgotten. But I think the books are still published under Poppy Zebright, so I don't think I'm dead naming him. But I remember Lost Souls doing the rounds in my sixth form common room because it was wild that there were two male characters having sex. And that was, it was treated as like, it was passed around in the same way that pornography was passed around. Like, it was so unusual to see a queer character. And that would have been like 98, 99. So again, less than 30 years ago.
Right. Oh, absolutely. Just passed around and hidden away.
I totally agree. I don't, I think about this a lot of like, when did I first read a queer book that I was like, wow, this is queer? And like the first one that comes to mind is The Color Purple, which is kind of a weird choice for that. It's the representation of queerness is very different from what you see in books now and is like still rather tragic. It's one of those stories where you definitely don't necessarily feel good about being queer for reading it. But I think that the change has been so massive in recent years. And I personally give a lot of credit to Casey McQuiston for Red, White, and Royal Blue, because I think that was a book that showed that not only could you tell interesting, engaging queer stories, but they could be a success, like a marketable and a commercial success, and that not just queer people would read them and enjoy them. And I think that there was a huge change in the publishing world from that, when suddenly people started to realize like, oh, we can make money off of queerness, which is problematic in its own ways. Like being queer and finding joy in queer stories is so wonderful in so many ways outside of the commercialization of it. But I think that it has opened the door for a lot more stories to be told. So it was an interesting moment. I think that there was just like a let's go back to that seismic word, a seismic shift in the ability to get queer stories out there.
Yeah, I definitely think the point of marketability makes such a distinct moment or like culture shift as well, because it was no longer this has to be niche publishing, this has to be this has to be a specific subgenre, this could just be as beach read marketable as anything else.
And people forget all the time that publishing is a business, that it's a business full of people who love books, but sooner or later the money has to come in or they can't pay those people who love books. And so, I think, I do remember like reading books 20 years ago by like Melinda Lowe, and Ash did really, really well. But in terms of, you're right, there has to be that kind of watershed moment, whether it's they both die at the end or Red, White, Royal Blue or Heartstopper, there has to be those books bringing in the money, or they just won't publish any more of them. And that's kind of a depressing fact of the industry.
Now, would either of you say that there is a shift in how some of the tropes we expect to see in queer lit have changed over the years? Like, are there trends now that stand out as, oh, we have to do this? Or would you say now it's a little more like, we do just have queer romantasy because romantasy is popular and there are queer authors who want to write it? Or are we still kind of stuck in some of those, they both have to die at the end, or something very traumatic has to happen?
I think that we're starting to see some changes there personally. I think that especially that early wave of queer fiction coming out was such a huge part of it. Like every story had to involve some kind of dramatic coming out, being forced out or not going well. I feel like that was often like a huge plot point, and we're seeing a lot less of that. I think that it is still an important story, and I think that those stories deserve to be told. But I almost see more of now that queer stories get to kind of inhabit those tropes that haven't been available to us for so long. Like now we're starting to see queer, second chance romances and queer celebrity and normal romances and some of these other, I'm obviously speaking from a romance perspective, but in other genres as well. Like we've been reading some like great queer sci-fi that does really exciting things. So I think that, I've seen some people saying that like, oh, do we really need like 7 Pride and Prejudice retellings? But seeing it in a queer way, it does feel new and fresh to me. So I'm really excited to see some of those tropes turned on their head in a new queer light.
Right. I even think of a few years ago when Adam Sass published The 99 Boyfriends of Micah Summers. On the page, when the first time that the boyfriends have sex, the next day his parents say, "Hey, let's talk about prep. Let's talk about getting you on prep." Like just some of the things that are like, oh, it's not a dramatic coming out story and all of these things. It's just like, okay, well, now let's normalize everyday life or just things that are commonplace for a lot of us.
Although I wonder if it's cyclical. And I wonder if actually we're coming to the end of a period where people said, you can't do that. You can't kill the lesbians at the end. We can't have any more coming out stories. And eventually, well, actually, I think we need more of them because actually, I think if there's one thing authors don't like being told, it's what you can't do. And I think sort of, and if you look at something, that massively inspired my writing is Scream, which is when authors know the tropes, you can then start to subvert the tropes and do it, but do it in an interesting kind of more knowing way, which is, even if you look at something like They Both Die at the End, it's right there in the title kind of. And so I think I wonder if we'll see more of that. But, we know the tropes and they're there to be played with.
It definitely feels like there's a lot more play happening that you're absolutely right is we're aware and now we're playing with our own awareness. We're letting the people know that this isn't going to be what you expect.
And that's because there's more of us doing it. I think when there were only, because I really have been around for so long, when there was like this handful of us doing it, there's like this real pressure on you kind of to, I guess, get it right and do it a certain way. Whereas I've always said the answer is always more. People don't just buy one book or one author in their lifetime. And so the fact that there is a lot more queer fiction now means that there's just a lot more room for people to write what they want, and it shouldn't be like a zero-sum thing.
Now, how would you say that has shaped both of your experiences now that you don't have necessarily the weight of, I have to carry this exact expectation to my audience or to the world? Or does it still feel like there may be an expectation of, I have to tell a very specific whatever storyline?
I do worry all the time. I worry that, I mean, let's just say it. We all live in a world now where we worry that we're just going to accidentally be cancelled. I don't know about anybody else, but you just worry that you're going to accidentally step on a mine somehow and ruin your career. But and so that is something to think about. But then, I've long championed the importance of having sort of sensitivity readers around your work. And so I worry a lot less than I would, I think, if I didn't have a team of editors behind me. But you still, I think this is it, when you are a progressive queer writer, there is way more pressure on you than if I was a foul right-wing commentator, because everybody expects foul right commentators to be foul and far right. Whereas if you are somebody who has had a long-standing career as like a progressive queer voice, I do still, even now, 15 years on, I do still feel a bit of a weight of responsibility. But at the same time, the only rule that I try to stick to is I just want to write a book that I would love. And that's kind of steered me right so far.
I think you're absolutely right about that, Juno. If you're not writing a book with a story that you really stand behind and love, then I feel like so much gets lost. And, even an imperfect book that you can feel like the heart and the authenticity behind, I feel like you can forgive a lot. And I totally agree with you that it's an interesting place to be right now, especially being in the US, where we're having this kind of big political shift. And it feels like, it hasn't quite been long enough for us to see if there are market trends, but it feels like there are fewer queer book deals being announced every day. And this wealth of diverse voices that we were having in queer books, it already feels as if it's shrinking. And I hope that that's not the case. I hope that we're like reading the signals wrong. But I think as that pool shrinks, the pressure does increase of what you have to represent when there are fewer authors getting book deals. And I personally write all of my books set in like red states and rather conservative areas where you don't necessarily expect to see queer community. And that is something that is important to me in my work, to show this queer community in a way that you don't necessarily, it's not like a New York or an LA based queer community. And I do feel some pressure there of, representing the good and the bad in those areas. And sometimes in romance, people just want to see everything happy and nobody facing any kind of like homophobia, transphobia, racism. But I think it's important to show that people can still have a happy ending despite those things, that they can still live a good life and have a solid community around them. So that's something that I try to focus on in my work.
I think it's so important for that message as well, because you're showing that community can be everywhere. You can create the safe space that you want to see in your space. You don't have to go to the Mecca. You can find community or create it where it needs to exist. And it helps us remember to protect those who don't have the same things that we're afforded, whatever that may be. Before we go into the big C word of censorship and everything that's happening right now, because Juno, you set us up perfectly for it earlier, and now I'm just like, oh, well, we'll hold off a little bit, I suppose. I was talking, which will be featured in this episode, with Andrew Joseph White, who is a wonderful YA, and he is making his adult debut with a absolutely like stunning horror this September. He was talking about how when he writes in the YA space, he feels a sense of responsibility for his audience to wrap it up in kind of a neat little package. But writing on the adult side, he did not feel that responsibility. He felt kind of the place where he could say, hey, I gave you a warning at the start what this kind of horror was. Now you can go and take care of yourself. You can bring yourself back to center or bring yourself back to peace. What kind of audience responsibility do the two of you feel? I know you both have a wide array of members of your audience, but I'm very curious about this, especially with our queer community.
Juno's written across a lot of different genres and age ranges, right? So I know that you probably are writing to different audiences with different books. So far, I've only written romance. And in romance, I have an agreement with my reader from the start that these characters, no matter what they go through, are going to end up together. They're going to have that happy ending. And I think that's something that draws a lot of readers to romance, and something that's particularly powerful about queer romance is saying, no matter what these characters go through, it's going to be okay at the end of the day. And that makes it something you can go into comforting. I do feel a responsibility in my work to show, kind of like imperfect queer characters too. I really want layered characters that are not all good or all bad. And I think that's something that just makes for good writing in general. Like, that's not something that should be specific to queer stories, but I think that sometimes queer stories are held to a different metric than straight stories in that way. But yeah, I mostly am saying no matter how messy these characters may be, how imperfect they may be, they're still going to get their happy ending. What do you think, Juno?
Yeah, I think it varies slightly between my YA stuff and my adult stuff, in that with the YA, and this just only applies to me because, I love novels by Louise O'Neill, who's an amazing Irish author, whose books are quite hopeless, actually, and that they end on such a downbeat note. Whereas for me, I always wanted to leave my YA novels with just a glimmer of hope, even though the characters go through quite awful things, because I ended up writing at the very top end of YA, quite sort of controversial, gritty novels about addiction and the modeling industry. But I believe as a human in life, there is always hope. Even though I live on Turf Island, I believe there is hope. She might drop off the yacht. We don't know what's going to happen. And so there's always hope. With the adult stuff, actually, it's not that different. I think that the difference between my adult work and my YA work is that in Her Majesty's Royal Coven trilogy, the characters are my age now. They're in their sort of 30s and 40s. And I wanted to deal with the life stuff that you're going through as an adult. But actually, and this is a hill I will die on, is with my YA, I never wanted to talk down to teenagers. I always regarded them as young adults, not kids, which has kind of got me into trouble, which again will come on to This Book Is Gay later, because, some people think that what I'm saying is inappropriate for children. But I would say these books were never for children. I was writing them for young adults. And I guess that's kind of the only difference in that. In one lot of books, the characters are 17, and in the other, they're in their 40s. But I think the only responsibility I would feel to those readers is to hopefully give them, again, it's like you say, it's that contract, that sort of, that I'm offering you a ticket to an escape. And I hope you really enjoy it. And I'm not going to I'm not sure if I'm allowed to swear or not. I'm not going to mess with you too much. Like, I'm not going to kind of all of a sudden introduce the lost sword of Flobberdob that magically saves the day. It's just not going to happen like that.
You can swear all you want, Juno.
Okay, just thanks for that. Just, you never know with America, because when I've come over on tour, and I'm horrible, like British people, we're really potty mouthed, and I come over and start, saying really foul things, and like even in New York, people are like, what's wrong with her? Kind of, does she have Tourette's? I'm like, no, I'm just British.
Just British, that's all. That makes so much sense. I also just appreciate that, kind of depending on your genre or what you're aiming to do, I think your own style will dictate what that end product is, what that contract looks like. Because Susie, with romance, you could say there could be that really rough, nasty, evil breakup in Act 3 that makes you go, I don't know if I actually want them to get together in the end. Or you can go like, I want this to be a comfy escape for everyone. And even when it is rough in a moment, you know how this should end, because that's the romance contract. But then, Juno, as well, you have that sense of, we're all here to escape from kind of what's going on in the world. So I totally see that. I think it's fascinating how everyone kind of views their craft.
I think with the adult stuff, you're allowed to be a bit more ambiguous as well. I think, like, I've just so next year, God knows what's happening. Next year, I've got another YA coming up, my first YA in like 5 years. And that one, actually, for the first time, I thought, well, actually, I want a 12, 13-year-old to be able to read this. So there's no swearing. And I've just been a bit more careful, because it's about a girl group. Kind of, what if the dystopia had a national girl group? And so I did, and it is less. There are some characters who are a little morally grey, but the bad characters are bad and the good characters are good, and that's important. But even in Her Majesty's Royal Coven, there is a character who is, very transphobic. But I did want to delve into her and kind of try examine how she got there, and that was fun. That was fun to do.
Yeah, it's never fun writing a villain that's just all bad with no like complications behind it. It's so much richer and more enjoyable when you have a villain that you can at least start to see how they got there. So a
villain never knows they're a villain as well. You have to kind of remember the villain doesn't realize they're a villain. And I think that's whenever I'm writing, when I've just come off of writing an episode of Doctor Who, and that was really important to me, that my villain in my episode, he thinks he's doing the right thing. He doesn't get it. He doesn't see that what he's doing is terrible.
Absolutely. And I also was super interested in what you were saying earlier about writing for a YA audience, because I think it's such an interesting age range, because you get some YA authors who are kind of really writing for adults, if they're being realistic, because such a large, at least the people who buy YA books are adults. And a lot of the readers are adults. But I think it is important to have those stories meant for people within that age range, but also YA really can span from like 12 to 20. And that's such different parts of your life. So it's really interesting hearing you talk about how you
into a difficult conversation about age banding there. We haven't got time for that. We can't do that. But it's really tough, because again, if you go to that section of Barnes and Noble or Waterstones, if you're in the UK, the YA section is going to be housing your sort of squeaky clean, sort of tween fiction, but then right up to your, some of it's quite spicy these days. So
Right. And we've only recently like garnered the terms of middle grade, that even there is still like how young to how old, and then the same thing, I believe they're now working on like new adult, which is kind of a lot of what YA either was when I was young or what it has then since re-evolved to now. But it
Well, do you
is.
know what I think? I think when I was 11, I was reading Stephen King. Everybody was passing around a copy of, I can't remember which, a James Herbert book, which involved some really, really graphic, like what I can only describe as like horror sex. And we were 11 years old. So actually, as if you are horrified by Heartstopper, may I remind you that 30 years ago, we were all reading James Herbert in year 6.
See, and that's the
Snap out
thing.
of it.
Like, right. Before we hit censorship, I promise we will get there right there. Do you both feel creative freedom when you write? No pun intended, this is our transition into censorship. Are you feeling freedom to share your experiences in your writing? How does that look for both of you?
It's a big question, Joe.
I know. I know.
Well, you want to get published. You still want to get published. So I'm
Yes.
probably not going to write a 500-page Bratz doll fan fiction because that's not going to get published. It's
I'd
just
read
not.
it,
I mean, that's
though.
that's ideally what you can see my Bratz doll just on the shelf. You know,
Man,
I would like.
I should have
That's
brought
what I
my
would like
Pride
to do.
Bratz dolls down for. I should have brought them down with
Oh
me
my,
for
I
this
love those
recording.
Pride Bratz dolls. They're really
The
cute.
little, yeah.
They're canonically bisexual Bratz dolls, Roxy and
I love
Nevra,
that.
I believe. They're canonically bi. Love that for them.
Mhm.
Sorry, I'm not going to go about Bratz for the whole podcast. I would like to, but
Me too.
so you still, you know, I still do have that commercial thing at the back of my mind. But at the same time, Her Majesty's Wild Coven in the UK has sold really well. So the thing is, I've kind of reached, and this is not true in America, but in the UK, I've reached kind of part of the furniture status. So I think I'm in a weird position now where I kind of could write more or less what I wanted,
You
which
could
sounds really
publish the
awful.
Bratz fan
I
fiction if
probably
you
could. I
wanted.
wouldn't be allowed to call it Bratz, but
You never know. They might make a deal with you.
I would, if you're listening. I think, what is it, MGA? I'm here for that. But so I'm in a weird position now where I've got a kind of creative freedom that I've never had in my entire career. But at the same time, I don't want to throw everybody like a weird curveball. But to answer the meat of that question, I don't feel like I'm under any sort of under his eye political pressure. And it kind of works both ways. I think there is an expectation on me to represent the trans community. I feel that way more than I feel the watchful eye of censorship. And that's difficult. That's really, and I know I'm speaking to other trans authors. We're all kind of like, because we're always got put on panels together. So like, I really loved Tori Peters and Sean Fay, and we all feel an enormous pressure that people are looking at us to write trans characters, which is quite limiting. I always will, but it is quite limiting.
I think that's kind of what I was looking for too. You do feel that sense of responsibility on that end. So while you don't feel the under his eye, you do have the like, but you are looking to me to write a really good trans representation. But at least you have the freedom to do that.
And it's really tricky because, again, with the marketing, with the cold, hard business side of my brain, I know if it's a trans main character, less people are going to buy it, which is why I often have to include, like in Her Majesty's Wild Coven, we have the character of Thea, who is like this apprentice witch who is being mentored by a cisgender witch called Neve. And that was on purpose. You know, I wanted Neve kind of had to be the every woman. And you know, I think like 500,000 people have bought that book now. And being really, really honest, 500,000 people wouldn't have bought it if it had a trans main character. And that is so depressing to say out loud, but it's also true. Yeah, that's a downer, isn't it? Sorry, kids.
But
no,
it's
I totally
real.
feel you. Yeah. I've had conversations with other queer romance authors when we're looking at sales numbers of straight romance books compared to ours. And it's like, do I just come up with a pen name and write some straight romance to like pay the bills so that I can keep writing the stories that I enjoy telling?
Do it. Absolutely. Get the coin. Secure the bag.
I don't know how convincing I would be. I would be like, oh, yes, his hairy chest. She was so into it.
Floor, I said, as it came towards me like a rug.
Yeah. So I don't
Brilliant.
know. Stay tuned. Maybe that'll be my big dark secret someday. I feel less pressure, I think, than YA and kids authors in the US do, in how they tell their stories, because I'm not trying to get my books into school libraries. So, I feel like I can tell whatever story I want. I do remember having a hard conversation with my editor, who I completely adore. She is queer and is passionate about telling queer stories in an authentic way. But when we were editing my first book, Queerly Beloved, she was like, we want to strike a tone of like where this is the authentic queer story that you want to tell, but like the door is open for straight people who read it to feel like they are welcomed into this story and that they're not behind, but they're also not being explained to. And like when we first started this conversation, I was like, I don't know how to write to a straight audience. Like I don't know what to do about that. But having that conversation about making it a story that they feel welcomed into was interesting. I don't think that every queer book should be written with that perspective. But I do enjoy writing stories that welcome more people than just people who completely identify with my main character. So, but it is something in the back of my head, but I do generally feel freedom to tell a story in a way that I want to tell it.
That's good to hear, but also so strange to have to grapple that there is not a I don't know, the thought that you have to have the like, oh yeah, I guess I need to be ready to write the straight romance novels under a pen name to keep the lights on for the queer romance novels. And do you feel pressure in the system at all to step away from sapphic romance, or have you been just kind of welcomed in whatever lane you want to be in?
I'm at an interesting spot now where I've published three sapphic romances, and I've been experimenting. I don't have a book deal for what comes next just yet, because I'm trying to figure out where I want to go next. To me, I'm a Gemini. I get bored if I do too much of the same thing. So I've been looking at some different lanes to try and switch it up. But like, I know whatever I do is going to be extremely queer. It just may not be like two women on the cover who clearly are going to get together by the end. So I don't know. Stay tuned. We'll see.
Uh, well, we've talked about Turf Island. We have talked about not being able to get books in schools. How do y'all feel about the state of the world right now and the threat of on queer literature? I'm just going to open up. I'm going to kick the door open. We've been dancing around it. You two just have at it.
I mean, it's scary times. I mean, I think never mind in the world of literature, we could just say in the world. I think never mind literature kind of, but then art reflects the world we live in. And, it's like Bette Porter said in The L Word, without art, civilization would rot and die. And I really believe that kind of. So I think there's a reason we're suddenly seeing a lot of dystopian fiction. I do not think that is a coincidence whatsoever. In fact, at the moment, I'm pretty much reading exclusively dystopian. I've just read I Who Have Never Known Men. Yeah, I love a lot of Emily St. John Mandel, things like that. So it's difficult. It's very, very difficult as a queer artist to kind of, when you're watching the world kind of eat itself, to go to your little office and write your lovely little stories, because you're kind of like, what am I doing? But then you sort of think, I can't save the world any other way. Like, I don't have any other skills. I'm not a politician. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a philosopher or a lecturer. I do this one thing somewhat well, which is write queer stories. So I guess while the world is in such a difficult place, I will keep trying to save it the one way I know how, which is telling stories about queer people and hoping that with each one, a reader who might have never met a trans person in real life feels like they have, and I like to think that, the people who have read Her Majesty's Royal Coven, it's largely cisgender women, and they might have never met a trans teenager, but they kind of have now. And they see the way that Neve welcomes Theo into the coven. They see the way that Helena tries to refuse Theo a place in the coven. And it's up to the reader to decide whether or not they agree with Neve or Helena, and where do they stand on trans youth? And I'm in a hugely privileged position as one of very few trans women in the United Kingdom who's been given the kind of voice that I have. Last week, my episode of Doctor Who was on BBC One at prime time Saturday night. That's amazing. And there wasn't a trans character in it, but the character of Cora, I mean, come on, the subtext was basically text. So, you know, and the way she wasn't allowed to be out, you know, I think, you know, the context was there if you cared to see it, and the injustice was there for if you cared to see it. And so I think that's just what I will have to keep doing. But it's really hard to keep pushing the mountain up the hill at the moment in the face of, you know, and this is really sad. I mean, and I don't mind saying this, I'm supposed to come to New York in October to collect a prize. I won't say what it is because I don't know if it's public, but it's a prize I would really love to collect in person. But right now, I'm not stepping foot in an American airport because I don't know what's going to happen. My passport says I'm female, but I have to fill in an EXA form where I'm going to have to declare that I'm trans. And, you know, I don't want to be detained at JFK or whatever. So yeah, at the moment, it's enough from me, love. That's the reality of the situation we're in at the moment. It's messed up. It's really messed up.
Oh,
It is. Yeah.
beyond.
And for anyone who isn't watching this and is just listening, I will say that in the moment of silence after Joe asked the question, Juno and I were both just kind of grimacing a little bit for a moment.
Yes, if you are not watching, you need to be watching. But exactly, there's just the facial expressions in this room today.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I live in Washington, D.C., so I feel very close to the center of this terrible moment that we're in. And right now, we are kicking off World Pride in DC, which is something that I've been looking forward to. I think like 5 years ago, they announced it would be here. And this is not where I expected us to be for World Pride. It has been like really hard watching people pull out who were planning to come, people who were planning to travel internationally for it. And even just locally, people who like don't necessarily want to be there feel like it's a scarier coming together than it usually is. It's rough. It's a rough time. And I think it's also in my writing, I agree with Juno that it feels really weird to sit down and write this happy little story when the world feels so grim and you're like feeling the stress of yourself and all of your queer loved ones. And I think that's why I've kind of been actually going back and forth between like kind of a very cozy story that feels like it could bring some comfort to readers right now, and then something that's actually more of like historical fiction and a little bit more serious, because I find comfort in that, in saying like, let's look back. Things have been bad before and we've moved forward. We've always found a way. So I think both of those have been bringing me different things. And writing romance has been strange, but I do find a lot of comfort in the found families that I create in my romance. So I think all of this, when you think about like what could actually make people find hope and joy and comfort right now to keep fighting and moving forward, that's where I see books. And that's where I see the queer stories that we're telling being very important, even if they feel a little frivolous.
You two are both so right in that, like, this is the work of the art and the artist. Like, while you are not responsible to teach anyone a lesson or make anyone feel some sort of way, it is the gift to be able to take our experiences and reflect them to the world, share with the world how we're feeling, process it out, see how things that are happening now impact us and how we can make art that makes a difference, that lets us learn and move forward. Do you think, I'm being very positive because I want to be that, hopefully this is a blip right now in the radar, and in a few years we'll be reading and writing books about some of this. Do you think you might process out some of these emotions in your art?
Yes, it's the short answer. Yeah, I think. Well, I mean, that's what Her Majesty's Royal Coven was. I was supposed to be writing something else. I was supposed to be writing a YA novel, and then the pandemic hit, and it blew my mind genuinely that in the middle of a global pandemic, the British tabloids were still so focused on trans women. I was like, how? There are thousands of people dying of this weird virus every day, and we're still talking about, should trans women be allowed in Topshop? This is mad, kind of. And Her Majesty's Royal Coven was my way of trying to understand what the problem was. Why do some, particularly women, have this terrible fear of trans women. What is it based on? Where did it come from? Because it doesn't feel like it's based on fact. So it's kind of, and that was kind of where those novels come from. And so I think most artists are responding to the world around them. Oh my God, that's from the L Word as well, isn't it? When Jenny Schechter says, "Oh, I'm sorry that Monet sat and looked at these lilies." And then Alice says, "Don't you fucking compare yourself to Monet." So yeah, the L Word obviously was a huge inspiration on me as well.
Same. Thank you so much for always bringing it back to the L Word. I literally just started rewatching the series last night. I'm 3 episodes in, and it's everything. This is queer history, people.
Just imagine there are people who might have never watched the L Word. Just something to think about.
It is, I mean, like, let's be real, it's very problematic in many ways.
But it's nice to watch problematic things. I have a Sex and the City podcast. It's nice to watch problematic things and talk about why they were problematic.
Absolutely.
I was going to say Sex and the City is the next answer, but you beat me to it. Now, before we wrap up here, because I think the three of us could easily talk for days on a lot of this, what are some of the things that bring you hope right now? No, not the hopelessness.
Go on, Susie.
No. It's just like the gaping black hole of hopelessness. No, it's fine. We're good. We find hope.
We're trying.
See. Yes, in books, definitely. I've been reading a ton lately. I think that I had a bit of a dip in my ability to read earlier this year with like the anxiety and the stress of the world. But I've been reading so many queer books lately, just like devouring them. And I think that I'm glad that I'm in the headspace that I can enjoy that, because it does bring me a lot of hope. I'm currently watching the new season of RuPaul's Drag Race All Stars. And it's really fun to see some of these. I've been a fan of RuPaul's Drag Race for decades now. And seeing some of these queens that we haven't seen in like 20 years who are still thriving, seeing some of these like trans performers who like have come so far in like knowing themselves and are so much happier when we see them now, like that. I don't know. I feel like there's something really special about that as well.
Oh, Nicole Page Brooks being back on my TV brings me hope.
It's the best.
I'm loving it too. Genuinely, it's brilliant. I think there is a lot to be said for look at trans youth. What's really interesting is this notion that a politician could stop someone from being themselves. Like that has never been true. And so I think you kind of have to look backwards and forwards in that there are going to be queer youth who are just like, whatever, like kind of, don't get me wrong, it's incredibly difficult. Getting a hold of medication is really difficult. But then being a queer youth, when has it ever been easy? You know, it's never once been easy. And maybe that was something that as writers, maybe we fell into a bit of a trap of thinking, oh, well, they've got it easy now. I don't think young queer people ever had it easy. And I think looking back, you know, I've had to remind myself recently that before 2004 in the UK, there wasn't any such thing as a trans person, you know, and that's only kind of 21 years ago, you know. And do you know what there were before 2004? Loads and loads of trans people. And again, it was harder, but they managed. They were still trans. They still did their transition by hook or by crook. And so I think there is hope to be found in both past and present. And I think the other thing is community. I remember a few years ago, I was saying to a friend, you know, where should I go? If things get any worse in the UK, where should I go? Ironically, one of the places I said was the US, because it was Biden era. And I was like, look, things are great now. But that kind of proves my point, which is the political wheel turns really fast. And I live in a place called Brighton, which is kind of, I suppose, your nearest relative would be Portland, Oregon. It's got that kind of sort of vibe. And come off the internet, you know, the internet made us very global. Well, let's forget that. And let's actually focus on where I live. And in Brighton, there is no Aquera in the UK. And it is an incredibly inclusive community who have got my back. You know, if Keir Starmer came here for my rights, I know 10,000 cis people would have my back. And so I think there is, and I know we said earlier that we shouldn't have to move to these queer meccas, but even in your local community, what can you do where you are to make that a safer space? And I see that, from the UK, I see that in America, that even in red states where trans rights are under threat, there are people on a grassroots level rallying around, doing emergency care for the local community. And so I think it's ironic that I'm saying this on a podcast, but perhaps get off the internet because the internet's just going to make you anxious. So actually look at what's happening in your library. Look for the helpers. Who was it who said that? In an emergency, always look for the helpers.
I want to say it was Mr. Rogers. Does that seem right?
I think it was Mr. Rogers.
That feels right. Yeah.
Yeah. And I totally agree with you about community. Yes. I work a couple of shifts at my local queer-owned bookstore in DC every week. And I get so much joy of just like having people come in and be like, oh, I just moved to the neighborhood. Like, tell me where I should go. And I get to tell them about like, oh, you'll love the library that's across the street. You'll love this like pizza place that's around the corner and there's a bar this way. And I just like love being able to connect people to their neighborhood and feeling more grounded here because DC, where I live, is so much more than the federal government. I live in a neighborhood that's kind of far from Capitol Hill. And I love just actually being with people and off of the internet is 100% the joy that I need. And there's sun here now. It's summer. It's Pride Month. It is the perfect time to try and forget the doom scrolling and actually look at a flower and smell some fresh air.
We literally,
grass, yeah.
I was going to say, we literally get to say, go touch grass. Like that is the important thing right now. Disconnect, finish listening to the episode and then turn off the internet, go outside with your book. Well, Juno, Susie, thank you both so much for being here. Before I let you go, what are the projects you're working on right now and where can the listeners find you online?
My next book is Bed and Breakup. It comes out on June 24th. It is a second chance sapphic romance set in Eureka Springs, Arkansas, which is this weird little Victorian town in the mountains. And it's a couple that had a bed and breakfast they owned together. It got super successful and they broke up, but now they've both kind of landed back there at the same time, not expecting to find the other. So that'll be out on June 24th.
I will be, for this year, promoting the last book in the Her Majesty's Royal Coven series, which is called Human Rights. Obviously, what I want to do is talk about the new thing I'm working on, but that won't be out for several years, so I won't. So, this year, I'm really, really hoping. So far, the early reviews have been really, really positive. So I just hope that I've managed to land the plane. It's difficult, part 3 of a trilogy. I just hope that I do the other books justice.
Oh,
can you show us your dog?
You will. Yeah, please.
Oh, so this is Miss Angel Bun. She was starting to whine, so I thought it'd just be safer to bring her up.
It's always safer. She's so cute.
She's really good. She's a little rescue and she's very, very needy. So
it's some of the best dogs are the neediest dogs. Well, thank you both so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us, Joe.
Oh, absolutely. And listeners, now we're going to head into the next segment. Well, Andrew, thank you so much for being here. Everyone, we get a bit of a split premiere here because it's Pride Month, so I'm channeling Drag Race off the bat. Andrew, how are you?
I'm doing good. Thank you so much for having me on. How are you?
Oh, I could cry. No one asks me that. I'm great. I'm so excited to be here, especially since we get to talk about Pride and all sorts of queer lit. But first, I think I have talked about all of your books on the podcast over the years. Tell the listeners who you are, what you write, and what's coming out soon.
Yes. So, hi, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Andrew Joseph White. My pronouns are he, him. I am a trans autistic horror writer. My first 3 books, Hell Followed With Us, The Spirit Bears Its Teeth, and Compound Fracture, are all YA, all for teens. A bit in the older teen category. Hell Followed With Us is a post-apocalyptic horror about turning into a giant monster, and it's super cool. The Spirit Bears Its Teeth is a Victorian historical fantasy sort of situation about the horrors of conversion therapy. And Compound Fracture is my contemporary political thriller about West Virginia history and Appalachian politics and my home. And my upcoming adult debut, I have right here, You Weren't Meant to Be Human, It Is Beautiful, is a post Roe v. Wade horror novel about a mute autistic trans man who finds out that he's pregnant, very much does not want to be, but his boyfriend won't let him get rid of it, and the giant hive of worms and flies they work for also won't let him get rid of it. It's very dark, very gross, and it comes out in September. I am so excited. I cannot believe I got away with this book. I'm still kind of in awe.
I love that as the description. I can't believe I got away with this book. You are right. It's a stunning cover, but come on. Political horror is where it's at. There's something about just like I don't know about you, but every day something makes me feel gross that I see on anywhere, and having something that actually makes you feel gross as part of the commentary, I don't know, makes my brain feel a little bit better. It's the like I don't know, like the horror in me sees the horror in you.
The catharsis is absolutely unmatched.
Unreal.
Because I've been wanting to write a book about pregnancy and abortion and trans men in that situation for a very long time. I've had lifelong chocophobia, which is a fear of pregnancy, not even as like a dysphoria thing, just as like a human being thing. Like I can't handle it.
Yeah.
And a lot of my unfinished, unpublished stories really press up against that fear. And I was never really sure what to do with it. And then Roe v. Wade fell. And it felt like everything sort of dominoed into place with this horror novel that had just been sitting in the back of my head since I was like 15. And it is a lot. It was a lot to write. It's a lot to stomach. And apparently, according to early readers, it is a lot to swallow as well.
Yeah,
But
you
that's
were
fine. That's what I'm here for.
that that's kind of the brilliance of horror. You get to challenge the comfort. And I think as well, what I love about having you here is, aside from being a horror reader, Pride Month, we can celebrate queer titles, and no matter what your genre of choice is, there is something there for you. I mean, like that's the
Yes.
thing. It's not every like Netflix original you've seen of like Happy Gay Christmas. It is the depth and breadth of publishing. Like everything you are looking for on the shelves, you can find a queer version of it as well. Or at least that's the hope. Like that's the goal.
It certainly wasn't like that when I was a kid.
Me
So I say
either.
as a kid, I'm 26, right? I'm a baby in the grand scheme of things. But when I was in high school and I was just starting to have like my first gender crises that I would immediately pack away and ignore for several years. But when I was trying to find stories that spoke to me, I knew that there were some books about trans people or queer people in general in like the contemporary sort of, or maybe like romance sort of thing, but I wasn't interested in that. My interests were very genre locked. I was very zoomed in on dark fantasy, dark sci-fi, and horror, and there wasn't really a lot of that in the YA space, at least. I immediately went to the adult space, and started reading Hog by Samuel R. Delany and Exquisite Corpse by Poppy Z. Bright, just the grossest things I could get my hands on. Um, was that awesome for me at 16? I can't really say. I think I'm doing pretty okay now.
It definitely was foundational. It definitely
Oh,
shaped things for
absolutely.
you.
It very much built who I am as a person. And when it came time for me to actually start thinking about publishing my stories and my writing and what I wanted to do, I decided that for the most part, I wanted to bridge the gap that I found as a kid, where I wanted to write stories about queer people for teenagers that still had the boundary pushing and the stomach turning horror of the adult books that I read in a way that is safe and accessible for younger readers. And I've loved doing that. YA is my home. But I do have to admit, writing this first adult book was kind of like, oh, I can say that. Like, I can do that. That's allowed. It
Yes.
really let me do some more stuff, I will say.
I can't even imagine. I would love to hear more about that, because like listeners, and I have to remember because I'm recording all over the place. This is episode 2. In episode 4, I talk with Julie Soto about her YA debut, and she was saying kind of the opposite of like, I didn't know where the line was to still keep in the YA realm, and she found that it was still pretty loose. You could still go very far in YA before you hit the like, hey. So
Yes.
what was it like to have kind of like the training wheel sounds like like some it just sounds wrong, but what was it like to not have any boundaries, I guess? Is that a
Yes.
fair way to put
So
it?
the way that I like kind of conceptualized it was that in my adult horror, I no longer have a moral obligation to the reader to make sure that they're okay.
Got it. Okay, I love that.
So when
Yep.
I'm writing for kids, so I hear a lot of people being like, "Oh, I could never get away with this in a YA book." They're like, "Oh, but these characters swear, or there's like a beheading or whatever," and there's like, "Oh, they wouldn't let me put it in the book," and I'm like, "Okay, skill issue sounds like. Let's be honest here." Um,
Absolutely. Because that's when it's like, have you read YA? Like, have
exactly.
you read? Because that's what I was like, I don't want to say take the training wheels off because YA is exactly the same as adult. There is absolutely 100% what you said. There is just the moral responsibility to come back around and like put the reader back in a safe spot at the end of it. Even if
Yes,
you've challenged them, even if you've broken apart their worldview to get a new concept or feel new feelings, you're still taking them back to a place where you go, hey, you're safe. Hey, this is a story. Hey, think about it. But this is the conclusion. Whereas in adult writing, you could denouement yourself right off the cliff.
exactly.
Oh,
When I'm writing for teenagers, I'm aware that I'm writing for most of the kids that I speak to are either trans, autistic, or both.
yep,
And I'm writing for a very small, vulnerable population that very rarely has someone to look up to,
right.
very rarely is aware of people like them that get to grow up and live lives. And childhood, might suck and it might be really scary, but the whole point of my YA books is that you might not be in one piece, you might not be okay, but you are going to grow up and you will have all the time in the world to heal and get better from what happened. In my adult
Absolutely.
work, in my adult work, um,
Not so
I
much.
don't have to explain that to you. You're a grown up now, you'll be fine. Um,
Right. You can just say you signed up to read body horror. You signed up to read whatever that you are adventuring into. It's your job to take yourself to the healthy place after or to look at this as entertainment instead of right. There's a vulnerability to your audience in the
yes.
YA space that it's like right. Some of our most in danger youth are specifically in all of the camps that are that are typically reading your work.
Especially with the ending of You Weren't Meant to Be Human, it is a very extreme ending that has made it into every single comment about the book. The ending is the point. The ending is what I went into this book being like, this has to happen. I'm not changing it, no matter what anybody in the publishing team says. Thankfully, my agent really went for it. My editor, we had to talk about it, but he eventually like let it go through. He's like, you've proven to me that this is how the book needs to end, so let's go with it. And it is a lot. It is very dark, it is very upsetting, and then the book just ends. Like
I'm
like,
gonna I'm
here's
gonna have to like suck up to your pubs to see if they will send a copy my way because I need
I
to
was
read
like,
this stat.
here's a horrible thing that happened. It sucks, it's bad, and it's going to take you a lot of time to come to terms with what the main character just did. Okay, bye.
Wow. Okay, bye.
It's fun.
See, and this is what's so exciting to me about queer lit is we're building the space. So kind of like to look at the industry as a whole, as you were talking about, you are 26, I am 32. Uh and for both of us, it didn't exist. And I feel like I read so much YA, especially queer YA now, to heal that inner child, but also to
Yes.
just have that moment to go like, oh, I'm so glad this exists. I'm so glad this is out there for the kids. They need it. Whether you are a straight kid who needs to go like, yeah, I am straight, or also to just be like, oh, that's what my friends feel like. Like there is so much understanding, and the same thing can be said for the parents. Like, oh, that's what my kid's going through. Now I
Yes.
understand. Like now I see the experience. I think there's something about that. But looking at kind of the evolving nature of queer lit over the years, We've had some major milestones, but also to have an author like yourself who is representing quite a few powerful, but maybe small, maybe like, oh, we're finally getting awareness to our communities. You get the chance now to play in both the space for the queer teens and then the space for the queer adults.
Yes.
How does that feel to see things evolving?
It's so much fun. One of the things I always say when I'm doing events is like, look, I'm just happy to be here.
Yeah.
Like, I am just excited to be here talking to you guys, as you guys probably are to be here talking to me. I always say I'm just some guy. I'm just some
Yeah.
dude who really likes doing a particular thing, and thankfully the publishing industry was like, yeah, we'll put our seal of approval on this weirdo, and
We'll
then just
sell that.
let me do whatever. So, like, one of the things that I ended up doing when I was moving from YA to adult is that I didn't change the name that I was writing under. So I when I was picking my name, back when I was, like, 19 or 20, I obviously, like, I picked one that I liked, obviously.
Of
I
course.
also wanted to pick a name that was in the family. So I knew that my parents were going to name me something along the lines of AJ, but I had never figured out what that stood for. So I went to the family tree. I found Joseph for the J because that was both of my grandfather's names. And I went through the family tree and I found a few A names. Some of them weren't great. Wasn't going to name myself Alvin. I don't look like an Alvin, I don't think. I wear camouflage most of the time. That's not really going to fly. But I found Andrew. And so I picked that, and I really liked it because it looked good on a book cover. That's what I knew I wanted to do. I
It
wanted
looks
it to look
great on a book cover. You have the perfect name to be embossed on a book cover. Like
yes.
that's it.
And then I get called AJW a lot in shorthand, which is really cool. So usually,
That's
people say that like they know me, and it's really funny. I'm like, oh, I'm that real to you. It just
uh-huh.
AJW and everybody knows what you mean is hilarious. And I realized, kind of like looking back, if I had been going to differentiate my pen names between my YA and my adult, I would have chosen something different for my YA. I might have gone as AJ White there, but I didn't, right?
Sure.
And I didn't want to do that for my adult. And so I thought, hey, this is going to be a really good opportunity to offer a stepping stone
Yes.
for my readers that are aging out of the YA space and want to move to adult. So I
Right.
wanted to make it super accessible, super easy for these people who are growing up to find me. But it also meant that I had to draw a very strict dividing line between the two, which is why the covers are so different. So if you know anything
Yeah.
about my YA covers, they are beautiful pieces of artwork done by Evangeline Gallagher. I love them to bits and pieces. Absolutely stunning artist. And they're very much like illustrations, right? They are full, like editorial-esque, like art pieces, illustrations, portraits of the character. My adult book, so for those of you who are watching, I have it up on screen, but for those of you who are listening, this is a very title-heavy cover by Drusilla Adeline, also known as Sister Hyde. Very, very good artist, I think, based in the Midwest. And it has kind of like the gothic font, the sort of like 80s, 90s, like horror
Yeah,
vibe.
that like updated 70s, 80s Stephen King
Yes.
into modern 2025.
And there are worms on it. You got worms
Yep.
crawling through the words. Wonderful. So it's very different, very stark contrast. Because we didn't want anybody grabbing the adult book before they were ready. I can't
Yeah.
emotionally handle that. Please don't.
I know. It's almost like do I get to put a warning in the front of this one? Hey, if you are
I
one of
did.
my, okay, see?
I
Again,
actually
need a
did.
copy.
There's an author's note at the front,
I love
where I'm
that.
just kind of like, hey, because all of my books have author's notes. My
Right.
YA books have a very careful author's note that is like, hey, look, this book includes this. It's okay if you can't read it. If you need to put the book down, that's all right. My adult book is just like, yeah, this is in there. Told you.
And that's what you should do. Like, that's fun.
Yeah.
Now, what are some of the trends you're seeing? I know you are very genre focused, but of what you see kind of in the queer lit space as a whole, or even just within your neck of the woods, so to speak, what are some of the rising, some of the strongholds?
Trans horror has really grabbed a foothold both in YA and adult.
Yeah.
In the YA space, we're seeing a lot from a particular author, Logan Ashley Kisner, who wrote Old Wounds and The Transition. It is so cool to see like trans authors that are writing in the horror space, because that was so incredibly rare when I was growing up. And even once we move into the adult space, we have Grace Byron's Herculean coming up. We have Haley Piper's A Game in Yellow coming up. All of Alison Rumfitt's backlist with Brainworms and Tell Me I'm Worthless. There is so much that is happening, and there are so many boundaries being pushed. And I'm so glad that we get the space to push those boundaries and not be suffocated by respectability politics, which is something that I was worried about when I had first come out, because I didn't want to, I don't know, be bad representation or whatever. And I was so nervous about that at first. And eventually I was just like, no, we're going to gun it. We're going to put pedal to the metal and we're just going to go. And I'm so glad that not only that I've been allowed to do this, but all of the rest of us have as well.
I think that's such an interesting point, respectability politics. I think of the like asking your influencers or your favorite drag queens online what their take is on a situation that they know nothing about. Like that is such an interesting concept. And I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? Like that kind of do you ever feel like there is an attempt to stifle creativity when it's like, hey, you follow me for this, you read me for this, I am kind of doing my thing.
It's difficult. Um, because one of the things that I think a lot of trans people end up in, especially those of us that, have gotten these book deals or whatever, is that we walk a very weird line between artist and activist, where because we are in the spotlight, people immediately assume we're activists. And
They expect, they demand, but
it's like, I write my books. Let's be honest, I am a 26-year-old who spends most of my time in my office and writes my books. I don't have media training. I have no PR training. Like, I don't know why it's so,
it's back
especially,
to like art is activism though, and you are
yes,
channeling your art. Like your writing is your art. It's a version of your experience, and that expression shows the point. Like that expression
yes.
shows your stance.
And one of the things that I think is the toughest is that if you have a particular trans experience that doesn't match up with what the commonly accepted narrative is, that very often is a narrative used for our own safety. So, for example, a really big one is the we've always known narrative for trans people, or the I'm still the same person, like I didn't kill the old me narrative, which are 100% used as a way to take care of and defend trans people from transphobes. But it is also a narrative I personally didn't experience. I didn't figure out that I was trans until I was 19. I fully believe that I was a woman until the moment I realized I wasn't. And I also fully believe that the person I was before, like, it gets talked about and you weren't meant to be human. I share this experience with the main character where it's like, I did actually have to kill her in order to figure out who I was, which is a wording that not a lot of people want to hear because it plays into the ways that we get thought about negatively, which can be scary. Like our experiences don't neatly fit into the narrative that some of us need to tell to protect ourselves or to be accepted, which is so messy because
Right.
they're when it comes to like activism, it is very easy to latch onto a palatable story about how trans people work. And if you don't fit into that, and you're trying to tell your story, you're trying to write about yourself and your own story and the sort of things that you want to put out in the world. If you don't match up with that, there's this nagging feeling in the back of your head that you're doing the wrong thing, that you're hurting your community in some way by being honest about how you see things or how you grew up or something along those lines. And it gets really messy and really scary. So, for example, I connect really closely with monsters, right? Monsters are a huge thing for me, and this is because growing up, I didn't connect with myself because of gender dysphoria I did not have a word for. And I didn't connect with others due to autism that I also did not have a word for. And monsters were the only place I ever saw that. So when I was a kid, this was dragons and wolves. And as I grew up, it turned into things like xenomorphs from Alien or necromorphs from Dead Space. And I saw myself more in those things than in the protagonists. So monsters became very deeply intertwined with my gender and my disability experience. So when I decided to write my first book, I'm like, all right, we're turning about a trans boy turning into a giant monster and just wrecking shop. Like he's just going to be tearing people limb from limb. It's going to be great. It is a reclaiming of the monster narrative that is forced on us. I'm like, yeah, I love monsters. Let's do this. But it's so scary. And there was always moments where I was working on it where I was like, oh, like, is this a chance that this is going to reinforce the monstrous narrative? There's a lot of talk about trans men being mutilated women, quote unquote. And this is a body horror book. So does that play into that? When this is just how I feel about monsters and my own relationship with dysphoria and autism and who I am. It's so weird to deal with, but it is worth it because I do get a lot of people being like, you get it, you put it into words, which I think is worth it. And like, look, if a cis person or a not autistic person reads one of my books and decides to revoke their allyship because of something I said, I'm sorry, that's their problem, not mine. Like,
But that's so true. And I'm even thinking in our conversation here, the point of talking about pride and looking at your experiences, this is the space that we set up for that. But when you are looking at what could just be a tour stop at a bookstore, and that person, instead of talking about your book, talks about your experience, and like there are so many potentials where you lose the genuine author experience of, I'm here to talk about this book and what my process was like. And yes, I can choose to weave in how my experience has brought me there, but it's that same thing of looking at activism versus, like no one's asking James Patterson about his childhood in how he wrote his book. I'm sorry, James Patterson, you were the first name that came to mind. But like
no, that's so real.
but like, so that's the thing. Like we can all choose what we do with our platforms, and I think your point is absolutely right. Like your experience and my experience are different, but your experience helps me understand someone else's, or helps someone else who had the same experience feel seen. Like all of these pieces fit together. Like this is just the yeah, this is just the tapestry we're trying to get together. How would you say you balance including your experience with creative freedom, or how are you like drawing a community narrative within your readership?
Yeah, so every single one of my books, it is a part of me, like a microscopic part of me blown up to a massive scale. So usually it's the equivalent of like taking a biopsy and then just inspecting that and then turning the whole book from there. So as I mentioned, Hell Followed With Us was very tightly based in my, experience with childhood, and connection to monstrosity and that sort of thing. The Spirit Bears Its Teeth was based on my experience writing Hell Followed With Us and realizing that I was autistic and having to sort through the feelings that came with that. Compound Fracture was me going, oh, I love where my family's from. I love West Virginia, but it gets so misunderstood in narratives surrounding Trump and the elections and politics and history, and I want to work through that. You Weren't Meant to Be Human is the intersection of tokophobia and Roe v. Wade, and I have some other books coming up that deal a lot with how I saw my gender, how I dealt with my autism before I knew what it was, that sort of thing. So every single one of my stories is I'll have an idea for something that I want to write, where I'll be like, oh, this would be really cool. So for example, with the book I have coming out next year, You're No Better, I'm going back to YA. I've always been obsessed with serial killers, right? And I've always been obsessed with what would happen if someone was raised by one. So I've had lots of stories as a kid where someone in a character's immediate family was a serial killer and dealing with that. And I have this idea and I'm looking at them like, okay, what part of myself do I think that I can play with here? And for this one, I was like, okay, let's talk about the parts of autism that can get a little messy or a little upsetting or a little dark. and see how it can play into that. Like, for example, empathy issues or anger issues. Like, what do we want to do there? Like, play with that. That looks like a really cool line to draw. Let's pull on that thread. And then just building it and building it and building it. I'm very often pulling from the headlines. So the 2026 book deals with true crime very specifically and cyber harassment, and that sort of thing. There's a lot going on in that space. And eventually it just kind of balloons into something bigger than the initial kind of issue I had picked at with myself and, expanded. So every single one of my books is deeply personal, and I'm more than happy to like talk about it, especially when I'm like working with kids and that sort of thing. But it is also like not all of it. One of the biggest things I constantly have to do in every story is my parents are great, actually. I love my parents. They're wonderful.
And
Please don't take the book seriously in that regard. I'm okay.
but that's the thing. Like that has to be so tough because again, it feeds into all of the like trope narratives we have of, well, what trans experience are we checking off for you? Well, these parents are awful, so you must have, like, oh, you're
No,
from
my
West
parents are
Virginia
great.
and these parents are terrible in your book? Uh-oh. Like, yeah.
Yeah, my parents are great. They read all of my books. Which for this adult book, I
Yikes.
literally have to be like, I swear, this is nature, not nurture. This is not your fault. You didn't do this to me. It's okay. I promise.
You have to have the emotional Hallmark movie sit down to be like, hey, this book is gonna come out. You're gonna read it. It's not you.
I literally put that in the acknowledgments. I was like, it's not your fault. You did great, actually.
Parents, I swear. That's, but that's how it goes. I want to look as we start to wrap up here at what would your message to the community be right here, right now, the supporters of the community or people who are just kind of looking in and going, what's going on in here as we think about Pride Month, queer lit, all of that.
So I think I have two things.
Great.
One is for the whole community, and one is just if you're a writer. So we're gonna go with just if you're a writer first, or any sort of artist or creative or that sort of thing. Is that it's good. You can make good art while scared, but you cannot make good art if you're scared of the art. So in that same vein, I'm talking about like respectability politics, being worried about how you're going to be seen. I've written some of my best work while I was scared. I've written some of my best work while trying to figure out where I'm going to get my next dose of HRT from, if I'm going to be able to find a doctor that's okay. Like I've written some very, very good words while terrified, but I have never written a good paragraph if I was scared of that paragraph or how it was going to be taken.
Don't play in self-censorship. Like,
Yes,
yeah.
that's the demon. It'll get you. So you do have to exercise that. You do have to remove that, and I promise it'll get better. And for everyone in general, there's a tweet that I saw that I like took a screenshot of, and I've saved it. It's something along the lines of, you have to make it. If you're trans, you have to make it. I don't care what you do, but you have to make it. And I swear, like, I'm gonna get part of that like tattooed at some point. Like, you have to make it.
Yeah.
I don't care how, but you have to make it.
I think that's truly the best way to look at it. Like you have to make it. This is our duty now. We have to make it no matter what the stakes.
Exactly.
Well, before I let you go, any projects or things you're working on right now that you'd like to promote? Where can the listeners find you online? All that good stuff to make sure we send them into your atmosphere.
Yes, absolutely. So as we mentioned, my adult debut horror, You Weren't Meant to Be Human, comes out September 9th, 2025. I also have two more YA books, one coming out in 26 and one coming out in 27. Both through Peachtree Teen. They are going to be absolutely wonderful. I am so excited. And on top of that, we're working on the Hell Followed With Us movie. So yes, we are working with Powerhouse Animation Studios, who did Castlevania. We love them to bits and pieces. They're wonderful. And we also have Lily Wachowski on board, of The Matrix fame, who has been
I'm
helping out with
sorry.
it.
I am immediately interrupting. Are you kidding me?
That's legit.
even if they are watching, I know my wonderful editor has made you full screen for all of that, so they can't even see the faces that I'm making at you as you're saying Castlevania. And anyway, incredible. Please continue. I needed to
Yes.
dramatically jump in to be like, are you kidding me?
They are absolutely wonderful folks to work with. I've been having so much fun. I've gotten to see character art. I've gotten to see background work. I've gotten to see like drafts of the script. It is absolutely astounding. I think I just got like movie poster like options on my phone this morning. So there's a lot going on there, and I really have my fingers crossed that it's going to keep going and the way that we want it, and that eventually I know how movies are. There are so many places that it could fall through, but it would be really awesome if it didn't. So I'm very excited. And as for where you can find me, I have a website, andrewjosephwhite.com. That's a pretty good hub for my newsletter and for Twitter or X, whatever, Instagram, Blue Sky. That's all AJ White author. And then I am also on TikTok at Andrew Joseph White. I'm pretty ubiquitous and very annoying on the internet, so it is not hard to find me.
We love to see it. I would usually say, okay, well, now the next segment, but uh, did you imagine that this would be animated? Like when optioning was happening, did you imagine this, or what were your thoughts?
So I did really want it to be animated, and I also
Love.
really wanted it to be 2D animated, so I got exactly what I wanted. I was so lucky. Largely because I knew that if this was live action, I would have carried the guilt of what I did to that poor VFX team for the rest of my life. So I
Yeah.
really, really, really wanted this to be animated. And there was always like jokes about like, oh, I'd love for the Castlevania people to do it. And then we got the Castlevania people to do it. And then I couldn't talk about it for like a year. And then somebody tweeted that Hell Followed With Us would look really good in a Castlevania style. And I just had to sit there.
You just had to look at that tweet and go, boy, you're not even ready for this.
I was just saying, like, you have no idea. I do have to keep scrolling. I can't interact with it, but just know.
You didn't even give like the web sleuths the like Andrew liked that tweet.
Nope. I was like, no.
I guess I saw it.
The running joke of like a production company or a publisher like having a sniper dot on your head before anything gets announced.
Yep.
I make a lot of jokes about that where I'm like, I can't talk about it yet because they've got it trained on me right now. So I'm like, I'm not even gonna press like.
Nope. I'm
But
doing nothing, but I'm gonna think about this a lot.
I'm gonna think about it so hard.
Oh, I
And
love
hopefully
it.
you will get the psychic vibes from wherever you are in the world.
And one day when info drops, they will know that you saw.
They will know. And the art style is so good. I saw the designs for Benji as Seraph, and it gives me like Hades vibes. If you've played the Hades games,
Of
that kind
course
of
I
art style,
have.
you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's so
Yes.
cool.
Oh, I'm so excited. Oh, I love everything about that. Well, Andrew, thank you for taking the time to talk with me today and share about your experience in the community and in the book space.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Oh, what a delight. Listeners, now we're going to awkwardly transition to our next segment. Emily, welcome. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks so much for having me on.
I am so excited to get to ask you these pride and queerlit focused questions. So far, the listeners have heard from Andrew Joseph White, Juno Dawson, and Susie Dumond, and now they get to hear your take on some of these questions or wherever we are moved to go based based on how we're feeling today. Uh, but I want to start just in the basic, kind of like start at the beginning with the growth of queer literature. How would you say that queer lit book accessibility, kind of a lot of things, the genre's development overall has changed over the years from your experience early on as a reader and then from where you are now as an author?
Oh, it's definitely changed so much, and I feel really privileged and lucky to be a writer at this point in time.
Yeah.
You know, when I was a teenager, there were very few books that I related to in this way. Um, and now there are so many more. Um, I went to school to be a librarian, and I took this course on collection development. And we had this project where we had to pick a particular subject. and assess how well libraries represented that subject across Canada. And I chose LGBTQIA plus fiction. And I remember looking across the libraries, seeing that no libraries adequately reflected that based on statistics about the number of people who identify with being LGBTQIA plus, as well as things like hate crimes in certain areas. Like there was this data to support what percentage of their collections should be that, and none of them met that. And then the next part of the project was to try to find books to recommend to fill the gaps. And at that time, and this was like a decade ago, there weren't enough books to fill the gaps. And now I think that has improved so much. And I've been really fortunate to be able to write in this time period. I feel very lucky.
It is so interesting to even think that that was a decade ago. That was 2015. Like realistically, that was 2015. And
yeah.
And you're so right, because I think of I graduated from undergrad in 2015, and I think of the access to books I had then versus 10 years before that when I was a kid who needed these books. And even when there were examples, they weren't always coming from authors from the community,
Exactly.
or they were coming from a different place, or the author didn't have the opportunity to live authentically on their book tour or in the public eye because of the state of the world. And that's a dangerous sentence to say right now anyway, but especially then there wasn't the space. I would love to hear more about your work in libraries and kind of your experience in the library space. Of course, being from Libby, I have a bias of sorts toward libraries.
Yeah. Well, I went to school to be a librarian. For the most part, I haven't. I've mostly worked in sort of like library adjacent roles, but for a short period, I worked for the public library, and I went to Western University, and there's this Pride library there that's focused specifically on queer and trans books, and so that was a cool experience. But
I love it. And what was your relationship like with the library growing up? Were you a library kid?
I was a library kid. I remember in elementary school, we had you could volunteer to be like a library helper. I remember being a kid who was learning the Dewey Decimal System, and my mom was always a big reader, and she took me and my sisters and brother to the public library, and I have lots of fond memories of the library.
I love hearing it. Thank you for indulging me. I love hearing people gush about their library experiences growing up. And in the vein of Pride Library, I would be remiss if I did not remind all the listeners and mention here the Queer Liberation Library, which is a digital library through Libby. Well, not through Libby. This is put together by an amazing group of people. We talked to Kieran last year about their experience overall making the library and how they go into operating it. And so you can check that out, and you can also visit their website for more info to support, but have to plug it, especially in our Pride episode. Check out Quill, the Queer Liberation Library. Sorry, plugs aside. What are some of the current trends you're seeing in queer lit? I know we all kind of work in our own spaces, but what are you seeing? What's exciting you lately?
I noticed that there, especially when I think back 10 years to now, I noticed that a lot of queer books that I read, I sense that they are written for a queer audience. And one thing I noticed when I was younger, when I read books that centered LGBTQIA plus stories, it felt to me, and this is just my experience, but it felt to me like what I was reading was written for a straight cis audience. And I noticed that's a big change. And I feel that as a writer, when I'm writing stories, I feel like I'm not necessarily thinking, oh, a straight person is going to read this, so I need to make sure I make this palatable to them, or I need to make sure that my characters represent, in my case, being a lesbian in a way that reflects well on lesbians, and no one can be problematic, and no one can have issues, and no one can be complicated. I have to, I feel that has changed, and I notice that a lot in the books that I'm reading. I also notice, like more complicated characters, stories that have less to do with things like coming out or finding your identity, and more stories that, happen to have a cast of people who represent different identities and they have interesting stories, or they're cool people, or
I couldn't agree more. I feel like 10 years ago, everything was, this is written for Gen Pop. This is written for everyone. And the LGBTQIA plus audience can be like, oh, okay, well, thank you. Like it was like, at least there's something,
exactly.
where now it is absolutely being written by people of the community for the community. And like, yes, everyone's welcome. You can be straight and read these books, but this should be your chance to look in and understand and gain awareness of what we face, what we live with. And right, it's no longer that perfect, polished, we have to be the best representation of whatever perspective we're coming from or whatever we're talking about. It doesn't have to be sanitized, and it doesn't have to meet a specific goal.
Yeah.
I think of Andrew's work in horror, and the fact that it's like, well, I'm queer and I'm writing horror. And while my experiences play into that, I'm a horror writer. Or,
Yeah.
I think of that kind of being centered more. That while today we all have, in this episode, we all have something we're talking about by being a part of a community, it's all just like, you can find something you're gonna like, and it's or it's like queer agnostic, like it is about the genre writing.
Exactly. Yeah, I agree.
Now, looking at representation, I think this is something that, like, yeah, definitely years ago we looked at a little differently, and I think we're seeing the space morph and change. But what is the face of representation look like to you in the publishing space? I also think you have a unique perspective being based in Canada. I think there's definitely more Indigenous and Two-Spirit representation
Yeah.
in the Canadian space overall. But what does it look like to you in Canada? What does it look to you in, like, the publishing space as a whole? How we're approaching and shaping for people?
I think there's definitely still major gaps in that area. I think, depending on your, algorithms and what you see, you might have a different perception of that. But I think when you really look at the data of what books are being published and who's writing them, there's still significant, gaps. I think obviously, some people are given more opportunities, including people like me, because I'm a white cis woman, and I am quite confident that has made my experience significantly different from other people's. I do think that I mean, when I look historically, obviously there's been major improvements even in the past decade or so. I think there's a higher understanding that when someone is representing a particular identity, they should be of that community. Um, Personally, my approach to that is that I would write a story that would center someone who has an identity that I have, and that I would cast my story with people who are of identities that I don't have, but who I do have experience, learning about, reading stories about, being friends with, and that, I can represent what it's like to be friends with a trans person. I can't represent what it's like to be a trans person, but I can represent what it's like to, have a friend who is, or to be related to someone who is, or that sort of thing. So that's my personal approach to that.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting, the balance that a community of authors does to make sure that we're making space for the voices of these stories to come forward and tell their stories, but also still being able to share our own experience. I think you're absolutely right. The idea of, like, well, I still have my experience as a person with trans people, as
Yeah.
a as a as a as a person who has trans friends, who has helped folks in their process of transitioning and coming out and all of these stories. But right, my experiences could never be that. So I can't tell that story. How do you balance kind of the larger range of creative freedom that we have today within writing and your own experiences? How do you portray identity? How do you keep the narrative flow going? What's important to you to get across in your writing?
Yeah, I think I do feel very sort of liberated to write what I'm compelled to write.
Yeah.
And I have put thought into myself around like, okay, what do I feel like I can represent in that way?
Hmm.
And try to be aware of that and open to hearing maybe I'm wrong in some places about that, but that's generally my approach. I try not to think beyond making sure that I feel like morally and ethically like I'm making appropriate choices. I
Sure.
try to I try to not feel restricted, like in terms of the stories I'm writing, in terms of how I portray a character, especially like a lesbian character, which my stories tend to center lesbian protagonists. I feel very free to write whatever story I want to. And I think if I put too many limitations on myself, I wouldn't be able to. So I try not to think
Totally.
about things like, what's marketable or well, I try to just think, what do I want to write? What can I write? And that's what I'm going to write.
I love that. I think that's exactly where my brain was trying to get my mouth to, of like, you don't feel like you have the pressure of this from the pub or that from the audience. It is the, what story do you, who you are, need to tell. Like, it's just that pure authorial freedom of like, no, this is the book that's coming out of me because this is what I need to share.
Yeah, exactly.
How have you felt championed or supported by your pub, by your group of readers, by any of the kind of folks in the process from editing all the way through out in the world?
I have had a really genuinely positive experience. I think I've been really lucky to, like in the publishing space, I know that there are a lot of people who I've worked with who are also queer, or who have some similar experiences to me. I also tend to write characters who are struggling with mental illness or who are neurodivergent, and I also feel connected behind the scenes in really largely in that way. I feel very lucky in that way that I have been connected from the publishing end to people who I really genuinely think, oh, this is someone who I connect with. And that was one of the most surprising parts about getting a book published for me is that like the audience that I've read books before in the past and felt like, oh, I feel seen by this, like I connect with this. But it's really interesting to be on the other end because I was really genuinely surprised by the number of people who reached out to me to say, I feel seen by this. And I sort of got that feeling only sort of intensified. And it really made me feel like, oh, like I'm not alone. Like there are so many people. I'm not such a unique person. I really have people who are experiencing the world similar to me. And I wouldn't have thought that before writing my
I
first book.
I think that's so beautiful though, because it's one of those things with authors that I am sometimes afraid to be like, what are your reader experiences like? What are your fan and review and whatever experiences like? Because it's usually the like, you never know when someone is going, oh well, I saw one negative comment once and that's when I stopped looking. But I think in the queer space, there is like a beauty of exactly that, where you get to feel back the, oh good, I did what I wanted to do, what I set out to do. That like, even though you're not, there isn't a checklist of like the marketable things or the to write book I do this list. It's the like, I think you have inherently the goal of, I want to make books that make people feel seen. And so do you have any moments that stick out to you, or anything that comes to mind to share of like just a really great interaction or experience, or what book do you find people resonate the most with?
Um, I really have been really lucky to get a surprising number of messages from people that feel really sincere. And I
I
think,
love that.
yeah, I think it's because there's a mix of, my books are centering like a lesbian character who also, in my second book, Interesting Facts About Space, the character like seeks an autism diagnosis. And I have received a lot of messages from people saying, oh, like I really relate to that, and I'm autistic. And with my first book, I received messages from like psychiatrists who said things like, I don't know if you relate to the character in your book, but if you do, you should look and see if you're autistic or if you're OCD. And I thought that was interesting. I was surprised by my books aren't YA, and I think one thing that has been sort of touching to me is that there have been teenagers who have written to me. And I think just because of part of what we were talking about before, when I think of myself as a teenager and I think of the books I was reading, I think it's really so cool and touching to hear that someone who, is 14 has found a book that they say they relate to, they feel reflected in. Just because when I look back at myself, I'm like, oh, I love that you have that. And, so maybe that.
And as well, I feel like the lesbian community, I don't know, I feel like it's overlooked, or I think it's centered in such a different part, or like there are, like we put our focus in a different part of our alphabet at any given moment, depending on what's going on in the world. And I think that's why, like, your stories being so beautiful and centering in both the lesbian space and the neurodivergent space are going to pull in people across the age range to just be like, thank you, finally someone gets it. There's, I don't know, there's just beauty there. How would you say we go about creating safe spaces and a sense of community for our readers, for the audience? I mean, I think there's an important role in literature in fostering community. I mean, we see it at the very basic end from book clubs, but then online where people find each other because they go, I love this book and I'm here to talk about it. What do you think? Do you think about creating community and serving as a safe space?
I think that's one of the cool parts about books, and especially queer books, is it is a sort of connective thing. It does help make community, and I think community is so important. I think libraries are so important. I think especially with the way, with our current political climate and what's happening in the States and everything, I think I understand that community is like sort of one of the remedies to that. But I also am, unfortunately, such a hermit and so introverted. And even though I really genuinely love people, I am also so burnt out by even small interactions. And so I feel very lucky to have some way, like I feel like writing a book, for example, I feel so happy when I see, oh, someone had a book club and they were reading my book, and I can kind of think, okay, even though I'm maybe not pulling up what I need to in terms of contributing to community connection here, at least there's that.
That's amazing, because I'm right there with you of like, I love that I used up all my energy to record these episodes and then I get to sit in the back as people enjoy them.
Exactly.
That's so good though, because I I hope today that, like, throughout all of these conversations, folks can look and find what community means to them. That it could be talking online about a book, talking online about a show, talking
Yeah.
in spaces that don't have to be person to person physical interactions, but that it can also be about creating the community that we need or that we want to see in the world. So it can go anywhere from, right, being at your library and supporting physically. It can be creating a safe space for people to come and be protected, or it can be writing, reading, all of these things. That, like, there are nuances and layers to community that
Yeah.
we're not having to do one thing or another. What has made you feel seen or celebrated within the queer space recently? What are some books that you want to uplift?
There's a book called Palm Meridian that I loved. It's about a retirement home set in, like, I can't remember the exact day, but it's like 2067 or something like that. And it's a retirement home for lesbians, non-binary, and trans people. And it's the story that's about the main character's last day. She's gonna do assisted dying, but it's not sad. It's very like life affirming, and it's like really about queer joy and community. It relates to what we were talking about. It's a lovely, uplifting, sad and touching, but really life affirming queer joy type of book.
Oh, I love that. And I love whenever we can sneak in a book rec. Now, Emily, before I let you go, what are the projects you're working on right now? Anything you want to promote, where the folks can find you online?
Yeah. Well, my most recent book is called We Could Be Rats. I'm
Which
writing a
is
new book.
a brilliant title, by the
Oh,
way.
thank you. Rat-centric story. Yeah, I was happy that got to be the title. I'm working on a new book that's actually centers a librarian, because I like to pick from experiences in my own life, but that's not available yet. But that's my next project.
That's super exciting. Do you know when that one's coming out, or are you still writing? Is
We're
where are you at in the
editing it.
process?
I think
Ooh,
it'll
okay.
come out probably in January of next year, probably. I'm not sure though.
That's exciting. Okay,
Yeah.
well, keep an eye out for 2026. And if they want to keep up with you online, anywhere we should send them?
I'm on Instagram and TikTok. My name's Emily Austin. It tends to be Emily Austin author. There's another Emily Austin who I'm
That
not.
beat you to it. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the best thing about talking to authors is what did their Instagram handle have to be?
Yeah.
Well, Emily, thank you so much for joining me and sharing about your experience and talking queer books.
Thanks so much for having me on. It was lovely chatting.
And now let's head into our next segment. Well, hey, y'all. Before we dive into our second segment, wanted to take this moment for a quick break, let you pause, step away, and let me promote our merch store, Plot Threads. If you are a fan of unique bookish merch, you've got to check out plotthreadshop.com. Yes, that's right. We have our official merch shop. From cozy reading shirts to mugs to hats, we've got something for every book, film, and library lover, including this Libby Pride tee. That's right. You can see right there her usual teal hair ribbon is a pride flag. I absolutely love it. This is linked in the show notes if you want to jump over and check it out for yourself. I've got it in the color natural. It's also available in white, I believe. It's so comfy, it fits true to size, and it's perfect for your next long reading session or gifting to a fellow book, film, or library enthusiast. Profits from plotthreadshop.com are donated to the American Library Association's Office of Diversity, Literacy, and Outreach Services. So not only can you get some merch you'll love, you can feel good doing it. All right, now that you've got some shopping to do, let's get back into the episode. Here comes some Pride book recs you won't want to miss. All right, everyone. Well, welcome to segment 2 of this week's episode of Book Lounge, where we will be joined by our amazing guest hosts to take us through their Pride read recommendations. Joining us today, we have Carmen at Tomes and Textiles, Cece at CCUing _ Jananie at This Story Ain't Over, Kayla at Books and Lala, and Meara at Meara is Reading. Thank you all so much for being here. Before we dive in, could we go around the room and do a quick intro to your space and what you love to read? I'm going to use the alphabet as my friend yet again. Carmen, that means I'm coming to you first.
Hi, everyone. My name is Carmen, and as Joe said, you can find me as Black Tomes and Textiles. I primarily read and recommend books by Latinx authors, and I also talk a lot about libraries and Libby and little free libraries. If you want to follow me, you can follow me at Tomes and Textiles.
I always love when people are talking about libraries. I mean, surprise, right? Surprise for me to say that. Cece, how about you?
You had me on the end of the list, so I was prepared to listen to everybody else. So, hi, I'm Cece. You can find me at CCUing underscore on Instagram or at Problems of a Book Nerd, pretty much everywhere else. I read and talk about queer books online, and in general, I discuss books' diverse representation and all that jazz.
Awesome. Love it. I almost forgot the alphabet. Jananie, now it's your turn. I was like, what comes? Oh no, what comes after C?
Literally me just now. Hi everyone, I'm Jananie and my channel is called This Story Ain't Over, and I'm on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok, and I generally talk about books from every genre you can think of, and I try to highlight as many marginalized and underrepresented authors as I can.
Amazing. And Kayla, now I have a grasp on the alphabet again.
I literally was like, wait, do I come before Jananie? I don't know what just happened. My name is Kayla. I am really excited to talk on this episode about queer reads. I've identified as pansexual since I was a teenager, and I highlight a lot of that on my channel. Most of what I read is horror, light fantasy, but I'm kind of dabbling in every genre. I post twice a week on YouTube, and I have for 10 years.
It's going to get me every time you say it, but there we go. And then Meara, we'll throw it your way.
Hey y'all, I'm Meara, aka at Meara is Reading. I read a lot of dystopian fairy tale retellings, gay witches. If you got some sapphic witches, I am reading and recommending it. And then just general like romantasy, contemporary romance, all the stuff you'll see at the front of the bookstore.
Oh my gosh, I love it. And I guess I should say I'm Joe Skelly. I'm your producer and one of your hosts. Everyone in this room keeps telling me I need to use my voice in these recordings. So here it is. I love to use the word queer to describe myself. And there is nothing I love more than all the gay books out in the world right now. And I just want to keep peddling them around to make sure everyone has great recommendations at their fingertips. So thank you all. Thank you all for sharing. Thank you all for being here. This is a vulnerable moment. It's Pride Month. We get to celebrate, and we also get to do that with the current state of the world. And so thank you. I know, visibility is important now more than ever. It never stopped being important, but I feel like now we are rallying at every step of the way to make sure that books are in the hands of those who need them and those who need to see themselves. So before we go into your recommendations, I would love to hear from everyone your experiences with queer books, what makes you advocate for your gay witches, for your anything and everything in this space. Free for all, go ahead and unmute, say whoever gets there first, we will all get a turn. But what brings you to this genre and what keeps you coming back?
I love a queer book, any trans, sapphic, men loving men, anything of that. I feel like every genre, the emotions, the stakes, everything is amplified when you have queer characters in it. Like trans horror is a fantastic genre because trans people live in a society that is like riddled with horror in their day-to-day life. Sapphic love is so sensual. Like it's not just like sexual tension. It's like little movements, little touches in a way that is just like so much more compelling. Like when you're reading a romance book and you're like, because they touched hands, like that is inherently like the sapphic gaze. So I think that just adding queerness to the stories just like adds a level of like poetry and depth and like tangible feeling to it that just makes them like all the better.
I was really privileged to live somewhere that had like a gay straight alliance at my high school. There was like monthly town gatherings. And even with that, I had a very limited scope of what the queer community was, which is a reason that I love the book community so much, making friends with and getting book recommendations from a wide range of folks who identify differently than myself. So I'm just thinking back to like some creators that I've watched for years who have been really working to platform diverse LGBTQIA stories. So if I could take 1 second to recommend a couple people, and Jerry from Onyx Pages, Joel from Fictional Fates, and Audrey from Perpetual Pages are some people who I've been watching for so long and who have really influenced my reading and my journey and my understanding of a community that I always belonged to, but I didn't really have the full scope of everyone who was in it and all the diversity within it.
Oh my gosh, amazing names. Thank you for giving us more recs of where to go get additional thoughts and recommendations from. So good.
I am an Audrey stan. I just adore their recommendations. Just beautifully poetic reviews, and just a generally amazing person. So yes, everyone definitely has to follow Audrey. I wanted to also add on, insofar as queer representation, that I had a lot of uncles growing up. And I grew up, I think, in a different time from a lot of you. And I lost several of them in the AIDS crisis. And so during that time, there was a lot of loss, but there weren't a lot of stories that I saw that there was access to those stories. So seeing queer stories in the last 10, 15 years, like really explode, has just been so incredibly heartwarming. I also have you can call it misfortune or fortune, however you want. I live in Florida, and there is a lot of challenges with books and whatnot here as well. So for me, it's not just seeing the development of these stories, it's also very important to keep them on the shelves so that everyone at any age can find themselves represented on the pages.
Absolutely. It is so important that we have the space to see the history, the elders that we don't get to have as elders, because specifically of when you think of the AIDS crisis. I also will say, on a similar note, I love the joy that so many stories now that we're presented with show queer joy across the gamut. Things can be dramatic and happening in that book, but it is not. I don't know. The time that I grew up in, it was a lot of the like after school special of, well, you're just like it is just, there are never good outcomes. And now it's so nice to see like, hey, we're looking at everyday life as normal. We're looking at the full range of the experience.
I'll go next. So yeah, for me, growing up from a like South Asian community where, queerness isn't always accepted, isn't always seen in a positive lens. I grew up with a lot of homophobia. For me, queerness was never something that I was allowed to acknowledge until much later in my life. And that was kind of a realization that really just blew my mind open for what it meant for me and my personal identity. And I think when I'm looking for books that have, queer representation, I'm looking for ones that sort of mirror some of that experience growing up in a community where, there's still not any kind of acceptance, or there's still a lot of stigma. And when you are trying to juggle the, weight of family and friends and a community that, looks and, is a huge part of your identity with also, your personal, sexual identity, and how those two things come into, really awful context sometimes. So yeah, it's a tough place to be in. And I think even on my channel, I talk about it, but I don't talk about it as much as I would like to. So yeah, this is me trying to talk about it more.
It's wild to me to see how queer books have changed over the last 10, 15 years. I've been making videos for about 10 years, been recommending stuff for about 15. And I remember that it used to be at the beginning of the year, I could put all of the queer books that were going to be released that year, like one page of notes. And I grew up in Utah in an extremely religious community. And for me, a lot of my identity was not having access to information about what I might be experiencing or what the people around me might be experiencing. So being able to have access to those stories, so many of those stories, is so essential to me, because being able to read them for the first time is the first time I saw myself and was able to say, oh, there's a word for this. I'm queer. I'm part of a community.
That's incredible. Thank you for sharing that. It's this is a topic that, I don't know, it speaks to me, it sings to me. There are so many ways that getting to relate to all of you when we all come from such different slices of life, but knowing that there is this line that we get to uplift, we get to protect, we get to fight and do whatever we can for is beautiful. So thank you all. I'm just going to be full of gratitude today. Thank you all for being here. Thank you all for sharing. And now I think we should share some books. Today we'll use the order in the doc. So Kayla, now forgetting the alphabet, I'm coming to you first.
This was like the perfect introduction to the first book that I want to talk about because it's a book that does deal with difficult topics. It's really heavy, but it also is full of joy. And it's a frequently challenged and banned YA title that navigates trans and gender fluid identity. So honestly, I think when people talk about representation, sometimes it feels like good representation can only mean one thing, having to be like the perfect example of your identity in order to be seen as palatable by others. And Felix gets to be a mess in here. Felix Ever After by Case and Callender is he doesn't know exactly how he identifies or how to come out or who to trust or who to be romantically involved with. And he's navigating all of that while dealing with all of the pressures high school already throws at all of us, like schoolwork and bullying and friendship. One day, basically, he gets outed by an anonymous classmate and he decides he needs to get revenge on that person. He doesn't handle everything with grace. He makes mistakes. He changes his mind. And at the end of the day, he just wants to be loved and be able to give his love. So it's definitely a romance, and watching his journey is so chaotic, but it's beautiful, and it's just one of the best teen books out there for, I think, any age to engage with.
It's such a good story. It's a gorgeous cover. Like I will always stay basic and just be like, look at how beautiful that book is. But everything about this is just, oh, Meara, I'm coming to you next.
Okay. My first book, it actually hasn't come out yet. It comes out June 17th, so it'll be available around the airing of this podcast. It is This Princess Kills Monsters by Rye Herman. This is a whimsically queer novel. It was just like, I was smiling the whole time. Like I said, I love reading fairy tale retellings, and this is like Rye took all of their favorite fairy tales, put them into a pot, mixed them up, and then pulled out bits and pieces. There's Little Red Riding Hood's Red Hood. The main character gets put up into a tower. There's magic. That's the 12 Huntsmen story. And our main character, Melilot, she is a stepsister. She is the middle stepsister of a sorcery-based kingdom, and she is sent for to marry the prince of another kingdom. And she does not want to go, but she's gonna do it. And she is just like bisexual queen. She meets a hot huntsman who rescues her from a wolf, and she's like, okay, maybe we are flirting. She meets a hot sister of the king, and she's like, maybe I like her. She never really draws any conclusions until the conflict forces her to. There's trans representation, but I don't want to spoil anything because that's revealed later in the book. But it's just like a fun ride. And I feel like if you liked Ella Enchanted, if you liked the Dungeons and Dragons movie, it is funny. It is full of like modernisms. It's a fun ride. And it's a great, like, lighthearted, no one cares that anybody else is queer. Like, it's never a trauma. So it is a fun Pride Month read.
Meara can pitch me anything. Like, can you just read like the synopsis of any book to me? It's just the joy you exude. I want to read everything.
Kayla, I was going to say the same thing. Like, you describe a book, Meara, and I'm like, well, here we go, putting that on the list.
Half the time that I'm recommending someone a book, they're like, I read the synopsis, and I was like, that sounds bad. And I was like, yeah, whoever wrote that flopped. It could have been done way better.
Truly, like, tell us who's writing these. We can help. Jananie, how about your first pick?
Yeah, so I actually petitioned to have Meara write all book synopses on the back of books. I kept you guys on the hook because I forgot to put my book recs in the doc. So my first book rec is Fundamentally by Nusaiba Yunus. This came out in February, and I really, really love this one because it is an example of a, person of color, a queer person of color, sort of just existing in their queerness, and that not being sort of, a trauma narrative or even like, the entire focus. It's not, a story of coming out. She is just a full-bodied main character who's just being chaotic. She's a very chaotic bisexual, which is literally all the energy of me. And yeah, basically follow our main character, Nadia. She's half Iraqi and half Pakistani. She's doing a PhD in criminology and does a paper on de-radicalizing ISIS brides and finds herself getting hired by the UN to lead up a program to de-radicalize ISIS brides, specifically foreign brides, and getting them like repatriated to their countries. It sounds wild, and it is, but it's really good. It's like the author does a really incredible job of somehow taking a really, heavy, intense topic, but also bringing some humor and lightness and just sort of, showing the duality of life and how so much can be going on. You can be existing in both happiness and humor and also sadness and, fear. So yeah, it was really incredibly done. And I love our chaotic bisexual Nadia.
The cover is also very cool.
It is. It's gorgeous.
Like one of those covers that I feel like doesn't tell me anything about the content, but tells me everything about the character.
Yes.
And I love that.
Yes.
And I love how they made the cover bisexual lighting. Like that's the color palette is bisexual lighting. I mean, who doesn't need a chaotic bisexual always? Now, Carmen, how about your first pick? There's no good transition from a sentence like, who doesn't need a chaotic bisexual always? And then Carmen.
Yes. Everyone be prepared to be disappointed with this synopsis, but the book is amazing. It is called Blackouts by Justin Torres. And this book is a work of literary fiction. And some people may have read it because it was a National Book Award. And I know that maybe that's not the most original reason to recommend a book, but the reason I recommend this book, and I have a dichotomy of recommendations, is that no book has ever made me cry so hard and then cry when I reviewed it too. Like I couldn't stop myself crying in the review. Like I read it and like it ingrained itself in my soul, in my heart. And like I carry it with me all the time. So on the inside of the book, there's this like the blackout poetry. And it's really what the book is about. You kind of you drop in, so you don't really get any background for anywhere where you are. And there is a young man who is tending to someone who is transitioning, like towards death. And his name is Juan Gay. And the young man doesn't recognize him, but there's something familiar. But Juan Gay just starts telling him a story of his life's work. And his life's work is this artifact that he carries with him called Sex Variance, a study on homosexual patterns. And that's a real life psychology book from like the 1950s. Justin, just as an aside, found it when I think he was thrifting or researching in an archive or something, and he happened to find it and read the book. And so he based this part of the book on it. But in the story, Sex Variance is actually written by Juana Gay in the early 20th century. And it's a collection of queer stories that she gathers. And in the 50s, she's kind of pushed out of the story, and all the stories are kind of changed to kind of align with this particular story that the psychiatrists are putting together. And so it becomes this story about who's incorporated into stories, who's left out. The blackout poetry makes a lot of sense. There's also illustrations. There's blackout poetry, blackout like fiction, interspersed throughout the story as well. So it's a really beautiful story of who gets to tell stories, who's involved in stories, and who isn't. And the crying, it was joyful and painful at the same time. And I can't explain it a lot about this book. It's in my heart, and I'll carry it with me forever.
For anyone who hasn't read Blackouts, I just want you to understand how well Carmen just navigated that synopsis. It is such a vague, strange book. It's so hard to describe. I literally didn't write a review on it because I didn't know how to explain it. So thank you for that.
That's definitely one of those that's been on the list of, I don't know how or when I'm going to tackle this, but I know I need to. And oh man, they just pile up, don't they? Like,
Whenever someone tells me a book makes them cry like that, I buy it and then it just sits on my shelf until the day that I'm like,
I'm ready to hurt.
Oh my gosh, yes. Without a doubt. That is how it goes. Like, today's the crying day, isn't it? Cece, can we have your first book?
Yeah. I think it's cool that Carmen was talking about like who gets to tell stories, because I think that's one of my favorite aspects of the book I picked, which is Juliet Takes a Breath by Gabby Rivera. This is also a YA contemporary. I talk a lot about sapphic books on my channel and how important they are to me as a queer woman, but specifically as a lesbian. There are a lot of ways that the word lesbian has been kind of co-opted by other groups, and so it doesn't appear as often in fiction. We get a lot of gay girls or girls who like girls, which is incredible and valid. But as a lesbian, to be able to see my word on the page, it means a lot to me. And there's so much that Juliet doesn't know about herself, but it's so powerful that she does know, and she's so fiercely proud of her identity as a lesbian. Juliet comes out kind of disastrously to her family and then abandons New York, ends up in Portland, and she's going to do an internship with the author of one of her favorite like feminist books. Her summer ends up being a lot more complicated than just the internship, though. She ends up figuring out that her favorite writer only seems to represent certain women. She does a lot of research at her local library and finds out about activists who looked like her, and she goes on a journey to try to kind of put together the puzzle pieces of her identity that it's going to make a beautiful picture, she knows, once she just gets there.
I love it. I especially love what you said right at the beginning, the idea of like, I got to see my word on the page. I think that's something that's so empowering, is that like the stories exist, are there for us, but I think no matter what, and I'm saying this as a privileged white man, like you don't always find what fits, and sometimes you have to be like, well, that's close enough. That feels good enough. And then to just be able to say like, oh, that feels good, that feels right is so beautiful to see. Um, I'm gonna throw out a book rack. I am a firm believer in sometimes you have to change up your format. Sometimes you have to find a different way to experience something you love. And for me, I love to pull a graphic novel out of nowhere. And I especially love, this was a recent discovery for me, a graphic memoir. So this is Messy Roots by Laura Gao. It is a beautifully depicted story of what the experience Laura had coming to America as the daughter of Chinese immigrants, as a queer person, as a Wuhanese American in the middle of a pandemic, what that experience was like. So after spending her early years in Wuhan, China, riding water buffaloes and devouring stinky tofu, Laura immigrates to Texas, where her hometown is as foreign as Mars, at least until 2020, when COVID-19 makes Wuhan a household name. In Messy Roots, Laura illustrates her coming of age as the girl who simply wants to make the basketball team, escape Chinese school, and figure out why girls make her heart flutter. Insightful, original, and hilarious, toggling seamlessly between past and present, China and America, Gao's debut is a tour de force of graphic storytelling. So it's just so beautiful. And I think everyone should pick this up. If you have not tried a graphic novel and you are looking for a good intro, I think graphic memoirs are a great way to do that, because a lot of us love the storytelling of someone's life. So yeah, that's my sneaky little pick for y'all.
I've never heard of that one. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sounds so good.
It's a great time, and I don't know, there's just something about adding in the layers of amidst the pandemic and suddenly Wuhan being in the name everywhere and navigating so many elements of finding yourself all at the same time. Just oof. So check it out.
I think that's got to be a really strong, like, it's her life. But I know that COVID was a very difficult time for a lot of queer people, especially if they were not out, or if they were out and their family wasn't happy with them, or they were having strife with that, and to be stuck inside. So I imagine a lot of people are going to have a lot of like a therapeutic experience seeing that on the page.
Definitely. And it feels like the time now where we can start to look at some of the pandemic books again, where I can be like, okay, I'm ready to I'm ready to read this now. It's been almost long enough.
If you need any of those, I got a whole bunch.
Always. I always need book recs. Who am I kidding? Okay, Kayla, we're coming back around to you for your next pick.
I think I can speak for everybody here that it was really difficult to find just two books. Like your shelves are stocked, and only coming with two, I was like offended that that's all I was allowed to do. But I am first and foremost a horror girly. So of course I had to bring one of my favorite literary horror books that is so queer, so casually queer. And that's Monstrilio by Gerardo Samano Cordova. It is definitely one of the heavier ones. It opens with a Mexican family whose young son dies at the beginning of the book. And the mother removes a piece of his body to keep for herself. And it then becomes sentient. And suddenly, this family is raising a monster and dealing with the moral implications of having created this life. And if he's a danger to others and like just what they've done. We then unexpectedly follow like multiple years and multiple perspectives from not just the family, but other people, including Monstrilio himself eventually. And it's everyone navigating their identities and their relationships, but within a creature horror, which is just so interesting and unique. There are so many metaphors in here for love and loneliness as a queer person. And it's just like the easiest recommendation that I can give. And I give it to anybody who will listen to me.
I have to immediately defend myself. It is so hard to ask all of you to only come and give two recommendations. Believe me. But I also am like, how do I get all of your amazing voices and opinions in a room and then not record for 4 hours? Because I struggle enough to stop us recording as it is. I'm like, no, there's gold coming. Like I refuse to stop any of it, but I get it. I'm even looking like as we're talking right now, I'm like, well, if I recommend another book, do I do this one or this one? And so I get it. I've really made all of us kill our darlings. But this is a stunning book. I mean, at first I was like, why does that sound familiar? And then you get like one sentence into the description and suddenly I'm like, oh right. How could I not? How could this not be more burned into my brain than it already is? Ooh, so good.
I feel like Monstrilio is so visceral of a story that like I read it in January and I'll just be like doing something in my daily life and I'll see like a little thing that looks like a tail or like a little lump of meat. And I'm like, Monstrilio. And I just think about it all the time.
Well,
I want
Meara,
to read this so bad now.
oh, you should do it. Next pick. Absolutely. Like this is your next book, Jananie. Well, Meara, now I will head your way for your next book pick.
Okay, my next book, I'll just say it. It's The Space Between Worlds by Micaiah Johnson. I was trying to decide if I wanted to set it up or not. This is, if you love a multiverse, this is science fiction. And I feel like I rarely see queer science fiction outside of the realm of everyone else is gone. And so this is like, we only have each other. Like these are two people who choose each other. And not only do they choose each other, they choose each other across multiple universes. And that may sound kind of like this is how you lose the time war, but this is like, it's not as poetic. It's not as pretty. It is a very deep commentary on class. There is a very rich technology man who is making impoverished people do things and suffer. If that sounds familiar, crazy that this was written a while ago. And our main character, she is in the lowest of the low of the classes. And there's this thing where if you are considered not important, there's many versions of you throughout the multiverse, and they will jump you into other versions of you, or into other universes that had you, but you are dead. And so that's why they're like, you have to be low because you have to have been someone that was discarded and doesn't exist in that universe anymore. So kind of Mickey 17 like, where there can't be multiples. And so our main character, she's a chaotic bisexual. She has her ex-boyfriend in several worlds, and he's a very bad guy, but she's fallen for this girl. And so it's her trying to save her, win her, while also doing all the other stuff that the story entails. And the very fun part of it is that I tabbed this book. I tabbed this book a lot. It is a beautiful book. I loved it a lot. I accidentally tabbed it with By Pride flag. So I like finished tabbing it and I was like, oh my God, By Pride. Love it. This will always be like a top recommendation for someone looking for a sapphic story.
I've had that recommended to me directly so many times, and I don't know why I haven't picked it up yet. I think this might be the day. I'm in
I think
trouble
this is
again.
your-
My TBR it has a problem.
Oh, I already listened to one of the audiobooks that we talked about in the last episode. So
Oh my gosh.
Listeners, it has been days. It has been like 2 days since we recorded last, just for the context of that. But also, Kayla, I mean, there is a Meara description for you on a book that you've been recommended. It might be time. Well, Jananie, I would love to hear what your second pick is.
Well, yes, because you don't know what it is, because I also didn't put this one in the doc. So
Hey,
here to
it's-
surprise you all.
It's just a whatever. We get there one way or another.
Yeah, it's just me being chaotically last minute. Anyways, my bisexual main character in this book is not a chaotic bi, but she is a pining bi. She is like, she is pining for her love. This is The Legend of Menaka by Kritika H. Rao. This is a South Asian sort of Hindu mythology inspired fantasy, and it is based off of the Legend of Menaka. And Menaka is a Apsara, which is essentially like a celestial dancer in Hindu mythology. And they are typically known in legends and myths as like these sort of seductresses who sort of go and enchant people that the gods don't like and, get them to do their bidding or whatever. So in a very similar situation, our main character is sent down to Earth to sort of tempt and seduce this monk, you could say. And obviously the myth is like a bit different. But the author, what I loved what she did with this book was she made it a little gay. She made it a little like queer, and she didn't flinch away from the parts of Hindu mythology that are actually very queer. There's a lot of gender fluidity in Hindu mythology. There's a lot of gods and celestials changing genders or taking different forms or in love with multiple, different people who are of varying gender identities or sexual identities. And so I've never actually seen that represented so fully in books and media. And it was just so cool to see that. So our main character, she's in love with another Apsara, and whose name is Ramba, and she, wants to be with her. And she's taking this last mission as her, ticket to staying in the celestial court and staying with, this other celestial dancer that she's in love with, but ends up falling for the monk that she has to sort of seduce. And there's just so much going on. And I just love also the discussion of not only sexuality, but sex and love and how we approach those topics. And also just this concept of like, not this idea that, sex doesn't have to be a bad thing. And it doesn't have to be seen as like, just wanton lust. Like there were so many really interesting and nuanced discussions within the book. So I absolutely adored it.
And I'm going to say it, gorgeous cover. Like everything about that, the artistry on that is stunning. And I cannot wait to pick that up because I was a Sailor Moon kid. Like I love any form of mythology delivered to me directly. And that's where I'm like, oh, perfect. This is exactly what I feel like I've been missing lately. And
yes, very
pining
Sailor Moon
bisexual.
vibes.
Oh,
yes.
Perfect. Well, Carmen, what do you have for us next?
Speaking of mythology, I have, first of all, I have 3 books, but 2 of them are one because it's a completed duology. I overpack a lot of times in life, and that includes with books. So the first thing I'm recommending is the Sunbury Trials duology by Aidan Thomas, and the second book called Celestial Monsters is out because you're going to want to pick it up as soon as you are done with Sunbury Trials because it just ends and you're like, what happened? And I remember having to wait a year and I was so disappointed. Like I was so upset by that. But this is a Mexican-inspired YA fantasy featuring a trans main character, and it is The Hunger Games meets Percy Jackson. And it features a chaotic group who become found family, and the mythology is kind of about how every 10 years, 10 teen semi-dioses are picked by the dioses, by the gods, to compete in this tournament. And basically, the winner carries the light to all the temples over the next 10 years. And the loser is sacrificed to Sol to feed these sunstones that are very important to society. And I love the pining part because Aiden just really does pining and banter, especially just so incredibly well. So yes, you are in the middle of what, in your brain, you're like, teens fighting to the end, but like, you're just so engrossed by this core group of kids. And I absolutely loved it. And I'm just going to, just 2 seconds. There's another kind of Hunger Games inspired fantasy coming out that's YA by Gabe Cole Novoa called These Vengeful Gods. I'm about halfway through, and it is so good. It comes out in May, so it'll be out in time for Pride Month. So if you finish Sunbearer Trials, These Vengeful Gods is going to be out, and it's a standalone. And so far, it is fantastic. Story about I'm trying to remember all of this. There's a tournament of the gods, and Fro, who is trans main character, who's also a death child, who is forbidden, like they're forbidden from being there, agrees to go into the tournament because their uncles were arrested, and they think by winning the tournament that they will be able to save them. And it just has me hooked. There's all of this discussion of haves and the have-nots. There's like 3 different like kind of levels of society where you live. And there's just a lot of things. There's masking because there's been a lot of pandemics, and that is something that's discussed. And Pro also has an autoimmune disorder that causes like some pain. And so there's just so many different things that are wrapped up in this book, and I'm loving it so far. So I normally don't recommend book when I'm 50% of the way in, but I was like, these 2 recommendations kind of go with each other, so I have to.
That sounds like everything I ever want in a book. Like, thank you for breaking the rules and telling us that book, because I'm locked in. I'm seated. The bookstore employees are asking me to leave, but I'm too seated.
We're anxiously awaiting its release so we can also start recommending it 50% of the way through. And you know what? Happy Pride Month. If everyone else wants to pull a 3rd title, we'll just go a little long on this episode. I'm expecting to see Kayla run out of frame. There was a 3rd book already ready. I knew it. And the worst part is, since everyone's muted, I look like I'm talking to myself right now.
I'll jump in all RT, Carmen's recommendation of the Sunbearer Trials. I feel like Aiden Thomas has always been a fantastic author, but with each novel, he's gotten better. In the Sunbearer Trials, he like truly hit his stride. If you have a Percy Jackson shaped hole in your life, it fills it effortlessly.
That's what I was looking for. I'm like, what is the comp that I'm like, this tickles that part of my brain? It's absolutely the like Percy Jackson hole in my body.
If anyone's not watching and they're just listening, every single person just went to their bookshelves and found another book to recommend.
Right. We went full chaos and everyone went running, and I'm here for it.
Well, since the spreadsheet wasn't fully filled out, I was like, what if someone comes with the same recommendation that I already have? So I had to have a backup.
Whatever your excuses, Kayla, I'll take it. It's fine. Well, Cece, do you want to give us your 2nd book before we go into everyone's 3rd? I love it. I love the chaos. I'm here for it.
No, I truly love that everybody just turned around and started looking. So I wanted to recommend a book that a lot of pride for me is also about centering joy and celebrating joy. So I really wanted to recommend a romance that just made me feel so soft inside. I feel like I can count on one hand the number of romances that I've read where you get to like a big declaration and I'm crying because I'm just so happy for fake people. So Love and Other Disasters, it's a dual POV romance. It's about Dahlia and London. They are both chefs with super opposite energies who are both competing in a sort of Great British Bake Off-esque like reality show competition. It's called Chef Special. So Dahlia is a charismatic klutz. She's messy and she's chaotic, where London is the show's first non-binary contestant. And they are so much more reserved and planning on focusing on nothing but the competition. But as the two of them get to know each other, of course, they both find the stresses of divorce, transphobic family members, and competing on national television fading away. And they realize they both might want something more than the prize money. I just thought that this was adorable. I loved Dahlia and London, and I can't think of a book I've read recently that made me happier. So happy Pride, joy.
You finished that description, and I was immediately like, I feel like I'm laying on my bed at a sleepover, like kicking my feet up in the air, like, oh, that sounds cute. I'm ready for that. Well, since we're all giving three, I guess I'll give another one. My next pick is Hombrecito by Santiago Jose Sanchez. This it got so many accolades because it deserved all of them and more. It's a queer coming of age story about a young immigrant's complex relationships with his mother and his motherland. So Sanchez plunges us into the heart of one boy's life. His mother takes him and his brother from Colombia to America, leaving their absent father behind, but essentially disappearing herself once they get to Miami. In America, his mother works as a waitress when she once was a doctor. The boy embraces his queer identity as wholeheartedly as he embraces his new home, but not without a sense of loss. And I feel like the loss is what hit the hardest for me when I was reading this. As he grows, his relationships with his mother become fraught, tangled, and a love so intense that it borders on vivid pain, but it also is the axis around which every decision revolves. She may have once forgotten him, disappeared, but she is always on his mind. He moves to New York, ducking in and out of bed with different men as he seeks something, someone to make him whole again. When his mother invites him to visit family in Colombia with her, he returns to the country as a young man, trying to find peace with his father, with his homeland, with who he's become since he left, and with who his mother is. Finally, we come to know her and her secrets, her complex ambivalence, and fierce love. I'm such a sucker for like a family story like this. This is another one of those that like there's just so much to feel, and it was stunning. Everything about it is just perfection. So
I was going to comment on the synopsis, but I was distracted by your soothing voice. So
Oh.
I just want to talk about that. Have you done like any audiobook narration?
no,
I was
but
literally
The
gonna
way
say
you
the
just
same.
read that and navigated that so easily.
well, thank you, thank you. Oh, I'm so flattered. Maybe I should. Maybe if anyone's listening,
You
there,
definitely should.
anyone from the audiobook industry, I've already got a mic and a setup, so just send me some scripts. I'll record them.
Hey.
My shameless pitch of myself to the world. Thank you. No, I love it. There's something about books. It brings out the NPR in me to just guide us to where we're going. Well, Carmen. Nope, I'm sorry. What? I was
Do I get a
looking at the
fourth?
list
Do I
and
get a
not the
fourth book?
Well, Carmen, I guess you could have a fourth if you want to scramble and find it while Kayla reads her third.
So kind that you're letting us do this. I'm going to cut
Pride Month.
You know
We
what?
gotta.
And we deserve it.
We do.
deserve the screen time. I'll cut my, synopsis in half this time and make it very brief then. This is It Came from the Closet. It is one of my favorite essay collections of all time as a horror movie girly. This not only represents a bunch of different identities, but it introduces you to a whole bunch of different authors that you have maybe never read from. And it integrates the horror films in ways that, like, the essays basically tackle a film or franchise that either has queer subtext or the author found something within it that helped them navigate their sexuality, or now as an adult, they can recognize parallels between the impact of a horror movie villain and their own perception of queerness and like how it all relates. So like one example is Carmen Maria Machado uses Jennifer's Body to talk about queer baiting and bisexuality being seen as performative queerness. And then there's ones that are like Grant Sutton takes Friday the 13th and draws parallels between his fear of spreading HIV with the almost comfort of seeing blood on the screen of a movie. It's just like, it was such an unexpected essay, and that continues throughout the entire thing. You see all of these parallels you never would have thought of before. And whoever edited this, Joe Valesi, knew what he was doing. Like, pulled all of these people together. They all had something interesting to say. And then you just get to geek out about your favorite horror movies. It was perfect. Flawless.
There was no doubt I was at any point going to be like, yeah, we should all have 3 books. But when you held that up and I saw the cover and I went, well, we definitely have to have that mentioned. It's a Pride Month. Yay, Pride all the time. I'm always saying that. But it's also audiobook month. So I'm going to say, listen to the audiobook of It Came from the Closet. Every story has a different narrator. And this is like powerhouse listing of narrators. Everyone is fantastic. So a second recommendation for this.
Thank you for that rec, because I'm literally downloading that after this.
Do it. Meara, option number 3.
Yeah. So y'all, in the doc, I literally was like, can I recommend a third book? And Joe was like, yeah. And it's because one identity in the whole acronym that I feel like doesn't come up as often is the I, the intersex. And I wanted to make sure that we hit intersex. And so my book is that inevitable Victorian thing. It is speculative fiction. They say it's sci-fi, but I say it's spec fic because it asks the question, what if we lived in a world where colonialism didn't ruin everything and everyone, and instead people are not held back and forced to suffer just because of their race, their ability, their sexuality. And so our main character is Helena, who is the crown princess of the empire. So there's still an empire, but like colonialism basically actually did reparations and followed through on promises, and everyone has equality. And so it's time for her to be wed. And the way that they do that is genetic matchmaking. And so while they're waiting for the test to come in, she gets to go have her kind of like anonymous girl summer in Toronto and just be one of the people. And she gets a crush on a girl. And so she's like excited about that. But then she's matched to a boy and she's like, what do I do? I won't spoil anything. But as part of the matchmaking, she learns that she's intersex through that DNA testing. And so she also goes through a lot of reconciliation of that's why these things in my life are this way. This is why I feel different in these ways. And it's a book where it's never a trauma or a problem for anyone to be queer or intersex or anything other than cishet. And it's just, if you like Shonda Rhimes' Bridgerton, where it is just every identity is on the screen, this is a young adult speculative fiction romance like that.
Again, if you're not watching, you're missing all of the amazing reactions we have as everyone is describing, because I'm just happily here watching everyone react to what's happening.
Well, I was gonna say I had the funniest reaction when Meara said Toronto, because I'm from Toronto. We are recording live from Toronto, and so I was like, "What?" Yeah, no, but great description.
Reading the book, I was like, Toronto.
I was like, jump scare, what?
Well, Jananie, do you want to surprise us with a third book?
Yes, I do have. I'm so glad I got to mention this one. But it is one of my sadder picks. I went with my more joyful picks for my original 2 because I wanted to highlight some joy. But this one is a sadder pick, and honestly, like, this book changed my life, I swear, and it broke me. I was like sobbing throughout, and I remember I had to put it down multiple times because it just felt so personal. So for anyone who's unfamiliar, I'm Sri Lankan Tamil. My parents are refugees from Sri Lanka. They're Tamil. And, the Tamil community is very sort of not very open to queerness. And I grew up with a lot of homophobia. And when I found out that there was a Sri Lankan Tamil author who had written a book about being queer, about being a lesbian, I was like, what the fuck? Sorry, am I allowed to swear? Oh. I'm so sorry.
Yes, you're good. Swear away.
So I have Marriage of a Thousand Lies by S.J. Sindhu. And essentially it follows our main character, Lucky, and her husband, Krishna, who are both gay and who basically end up in this marriage of convenience to hide their sexuality from their families so that they can continue to live their lives and sort of date the people that they want to, but so that they can maintain this relationship with their families. And I think what was so like startling and just amazing about this book is that, yes, like there's so many, you know, stories of progress and joy and all of that, but this book was such a reality for so many people I know personally, you know, and people around me. And like, you know, even to this day, I would not, you know, talk about queerness to much of my extended family. And I think that reality is just not talked about enough. And so seeing this book, seeing Lucky sort of deal with all of that, and then in the book, she ends up like going back home to visit her mom and take care of her grandmother who's falling ill. But really, she's there to see what's up with her long lost childhood love, who she was with when she was younger and who is now getting married to a man. And she knows something's up, and, you know, she's trying to reconcile that relationship as well. And it was just such a stunning and beautiful story. And yeah, it made me cry multiple times. I had to put it down multiple times, but it's really stunning. And I think, yeah, anyone who's like struggled to have that representation, and, you know, is probably in a similar situation, like, I think you would relate a lot.
I love it. I'm for any book that makes me have to go like, ooh, I need to go to my break book. We're putting this one down for a minute. I have to go to the other book I'm reading right now just for a breath.
I was gonna say that sounds like another one where you like shelve it and you're like, but I hold it till the day that I'm ready to cry.
Got a good number of those today.
Funnily enough, I was going to say is that when I did find out about it, I didn't read it right away. Like I left it on my shelf for that moment when I was like, I'm ready to hurt now. So
When I put a hold on those books in Libby and it's like, it's here, I'm like, not today, it's not. And then I'm like, remind me in 2 weeks.
Deliver later, please.
Deliver Later is my favorite Libby feature.
It's my favorite, but it's also my greatest enemy, truly.
Oh my gosh, right. Like, glad you're there, but also, they're piling up. Now, Carmen, you went on the scramble as well. Did you pull a fourth?
I feel that because I started the 3-book trend, if I do one, then I'm going to start the 4-book trend.
You're probably right.
And I don't necessarily want to do that. I mean, I could stay on here all day. I've got books. But I want to make sure we at least get through everyone's 3 books.
I will solemnly swear that I will not give a 4th book if we let Carmen give a 4th book, because I want to hear what Carmen has for us.
Well, you heard the people, Carmen.
Meara's become the spokesperson of my bad behavior. So I won't show it because I forgot that I got a different version of the book. So the spine color changed. For anyone who's not watching, my books are arranged by color. But it is called Bad Girls by Camila Sosa Villada. And it is a book of, it's a novel in translation. Camilla writes a story of group of trans women who are living in Buenos Aires. And they are this community of women who they are also sex workers. And they have to deal with, with sex work, with the brutality that sometimes comes along with it. But most importantly, at its heart, it is this story of like this found, tight-knit group of women who come together, they help each other, they fight, and they survive ultimately by holding on to each other. And it's very short. I think it's maybe around 250 pages or so. And it's just such an impactful story. I absolutely loved it. And I recommend it every chance I get because it's this power of the collective community that I feel, especially in these days, is something that could be, we could hear the story a million different ways, and I've needed,
Absolutely. And this is where I will remind everyone, all of the books are linked in the show notes, in the episode description. You can jump right into them in Libby, or use that as your jumping off place to make your own list of what you need to read next. To put your pencils down. You do not need to take notes as we talk. You are good. We are ready for you. Okay, Cece. You also were in the Jump Up Collective. What is your third pick?
I was in the Jump Up Collective, but I have to say, a sneak peek behind the scenes, I'm really short and I literally can't reach my third pick without going to get a step stool. So,
I just hear that you have Beauty and the Beast library shelves without having to work too hard for it.
I wanted to recommend Hell Followed With Us by Andrew Joseph White, which is kind of connected to everything Andrew Joseph White writes, but Hell Followed With Us is the first one. It is a really intense YA horror about a trans boy named Benji who is on the run from a religious cult that has brought about the end of the world, and he's currently carrying a bioweapon inside of him that is turning him into an even bigger monster that will cause an even greater apocalypse. And as Benji is on the run, he ends up finding a community of LGBTQIA plus kids. They're living in an old community center, and they have to fight against big monsters like religious ideals, and Benji is supposed to be part of an arranged marriage. The other thing that's really incredible about Andrew Joseph White is that most of the books feature autistic characters, and it is really, really incredible to be able to see like queer rep and neurodivergent rep, seeing how things intersect. And truly, it is autism rep that has made me feel more seen than just about anything else I've ever read. So I love that. I love that Andrew Joseph White kind of gets into the inherent body horror of being trans. Just the idea of not being able to be in control of your body. And I love that theme in every single one of his books. So
Perfect. I feel like we have hit every important touch point of like, if you are looking for the place to start your queer lit journey, we've gotten you like a good base level to go off of. I have talked about this. I'll give a third one. This is the book that I recommend too often because, much like Kayla, I am also a horror girly, and any sort of like psychological thriller, horror, creepy, anything is where I love to ride. And this one, I'm specifically going to recommend the audiobook because it is narrated by Michael Crouch and Daniel Henning, and that to me is like perfection. This is Bathhouse by PJ Vernon. It's great. It's great. You have husbands who are just the worst to each other. What they're both stepping out. They don't have an arrangement for that, and it's all the layers of creepy. But Oliver Park is a recovering addict from Indiana. Finally, he has everything he ever wanted: sobriety, a loving, wealthy partner in Nathan, who is a prominent DC trauma surgeon. And despite their difference in age and disparate backgrounds, they've made a perfect life together. With everything to lose, Oliver shouldn't be visiting House, a gay bathhouse, but through the entrance he goes, and it's a line crossed. Inside, he follows a man into a private room, and it's the final line. Whatever happens next, Nathan can never know. But then everything goes wrong, terribly wrong, and Oliver barely escapes with his life. He races home in full-blown terror as the hand-shaped bruise grows dark on his neck. The truth will destroy Nathan and everything they have together, so Oliver does the thing he used to do so well. He lies. What follows is a classic runaway train narrative full of the exquisite escalations, edge-of-your-seat thrills, and oh my god, twists. So if you need just like a truly wild, hey, bathhouse thriller, that's my third rec.
Sold.
That's my third rec, right?
Done.
Absolutely sold. Like your reading voice.
Well, if you liked the way I read that description, wait until you listen to them read it to you.
I am in line.
Already pulled it up on the app. I love mess and I love horror. So this is just sounds like it's definitely for me.
This is exactly that. It is messy and it is just that like that Lifetime movie level of thriller that like in the best way possible. So there you go, everyone. Well, before I do the awkward wrap-up transition to our next segment, anything any of y'all would like to promote or any shout-outs to give, anything in this moment? Everyone's giving the most kind and polite, like, no, we're all good. Well, thank you all for your recommendations. This is where sorry, Cece, would you like to throw something out there?
I was just gonna say, support your local library. Get out there and read.
The most
Celebrate
important.
Pride with something fabulous. So
1,000%.
I guess it is worth mentioning, just like so many of us, I think, grew up not having overtly queer media, you know? And the fact that I couldn't have gone into my library when I was 15 and found this book, but my son can, like, we need to remember that. We need to push for the inclusivity and the diversity. So just support your library and support the schools. Like, that's definitely such a good point.
1,000%. It is great to check ourselves and go like, oh, well, it's out there. It wasn't there for me, so everything's fine. Like, yeah, but you have to keep up the fight. We have to keep it on the shelves, and we also have to be like grateful that these things exist and push for more to exist. Well, thank you all for sharing your picks. Now is the part where we go to me in the future or the past, depending on when I recorded it, to close out the episode. Well, that wraps up our Pride Month episode. I hope you've had an amazing Pride Month so far, celebrating, remembering, thinking on what it means to be a queer person in the world today, or an ally or supportive of our community, remembering where we came from, thinking on to where we're going. Thank you. Thank you for giving us that thought and for this space. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this episode today. I really hope you enjoyed these conversations. I know I did. I know Juno, Susie, Emily, and Andrew gave us so much to think about in the space that is queer literature and what it means to share vulnerably about yourself and your experiences. And Carmen, Cece, Jananie, Kayla, and Meara literally jumped at the chance to recommend so many amazing queer books. If you didn't watch the video, you might want to, at the very least, watch the part where they get an extra book and jump out of their seats. It was a sight to behold. Again, thank you for joining me today. Tune in next week where you can get a deeper look at our guest hosts. That's right, next week, all of the amazing faces you'll be seeing in the second segment of our show for recommendations will take some time to introduce themselves and do our version of the new BookTuber tag. It is so fun and you won't want to miss it. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow Book Lounge by Libby on your favorite podcast app and check out the Libby app YouTube channel for our video content. You can follow us on Instagram at libby.app, and you can look for exclusive content from Book Lounge on libbylife.com. If you're loving the show, a quick rating or review helps other book lovers find us. Have questions, comments, or suggestions for future episodes and seasons? You can email me at bookloungebylibby@overdrive.com. Thank you so much for joining me today, and as always, happy reading! You can sample and borrow the books from today's episode in the Libby app, or if you're a librarian, find them for purchase in Overdrive Marketplace. Book Lounge by Libby is a proud Evergreen Podcast signature program. Explore more amazing shows at evergreenpodcasts.com. This podcast is produced and recorded by me, Joe Skelly, with editing by Andrew Alonzo. Our theme music is High Five by Rex Banner, used with permission. Book Lounge by Libby is presented by the Libby app. Learn more at libbylife.com/booklounge.